And one of the reasons is the current fleet is optimized to do what it does now. And so the supply chain is optimized to do what it does as well. So the future fleet's a big opportunity. Everyone talks about huge numbers of gigawatts. There's big dreams and aspirations. You have many companies investing in this space. You have large tech companies. You have utilities. Everyone talks around how they want nuclear in their space. So with all the talk around it, you think, why do we have to talk about the supply chain? Well, the supply chain in nuclear specifically is not like the field of dreams, right? If you build it, they will come. It doesn't work that way. So in supply chain space, it's more like if you build the nuclear fleet, the supply chain will come. So it's kind of like you got to think about the right order of operations there. And so when we talk about single units of a plant don't build a supply chain. You need multiple units, you need multiple orders, you need multiple plants being built to stand up all the infrastructure capabilities and the human capital to bring the supply chain forward. So when I think about investing in the supply chain, how you do that, you also have to think about, do you just want, we have this global supply chain, do you want the global supply chain to support it? If you want a US supply chain, do you still want to stand up the same capabilities that exist on the global scale? Can we compete on that global scale with the US with those same capabilities? Or do you start thinking around advanced technologies? What is advanced manufacturing? Do you still look at leapfrogging and standing up something different in the US to support a future fleet build where you can maybe compete on a more global scale? So that'd be some fun stuff to talk about today. Thanks for having me.
Matt McVicker, Vice President of Government Relations at Rolls-Royce North America. So I'm excited to talk to this crowd because I may not have to remind folks that Rolls-Royce no longer manufactures the cars. We sold that business to BMW back in the late 90s, and today we are a major engineering and manufacturing company. Our primary segments include the aerospace side, where if you get on a plane and there's more than one aisle, more likely than not, that's a Rolls-Royce jet engine powering that plane. So your Delta A350s, the new one flying out of Salt Lake to Korea, right, powered by Rolls-Royce. We have a defense business as well. So that includes both military jet aircraft, but also some unique capabilities out of a group called Liberty Works, which if you're familiar with Lockheed Martin Skunk Works, kind of secret aircraft programs, the turbo machinery that marries to those aircraft, we produce in Indianapolis, Indiana. And part of that capability in the turbo machinery space also has a nuclear applicability. And so we are partnered, for instance, with BWXT on Project Pele. In this neck of the woods, Project Pele will be the first Gen 4 reactor delivered to INL, hopefully in the next 24 months, and it'll go to test in the next 24 months. So it's a DoD program delivering a microreactor that can be chopped up into 4 shipping containers. Really, really exciting. And then we have a power systems business as well. Rolls-Royce bought Detroit Diesel's off-highway business. So we actually today make big diesel engines, reciprocating engines. We power the U.S. Coast Guard fleet, but also we are the emergency standby power units under our MTU brand for about a third of the country's data centers. Lastly, though, and really our kind of secret business is nuclear. And Rolls-Royce has been in nuclear for more than 60 years. It started in the 50s through what's called the UK-US Mutual Defense Agreement. This is the agreement that gave the UK nuclear weapons. And as part of that exchange, the UK gave the US noise dampening technology for our submarines, and the US gave the UK the first generation nuclear reactor technology to go and build submarines. And the Eisenhower administration selected Rolls-Royce to be the inheritor and steward of that technology. So for the last 60 years, we've been building little PWRs, compact PWRs, that can be operated underwater by teenagers. And we have an active production line in the UK, and we'll be continuing that line going forward with the SSN AUKUS class, which is the joint ship between the US, UK, and Australia. And out of that business, we've also launched using that expertise, a small modular reactor business. So we, Rolls-Royce, have a 470 megawatt SMR. We've been down selected in the UK through the Great British Nuclear Program, and also in Czechia, former Czech Republic, with ČEZ, the national utility there. That combination will lead to between kind of 4 to 6 units, which will get us down a learning curve and start to enhance and build that supply chain in Europe. But really, as we look out towards what is the market of the future, it's here in the United States. So with the US-UK agreement that President Trump signed last week, there's now an accelerated pipeline for Rolls-Royce to enter the NRC process. We're going to be design certified in the UK next year. And that really opens up an opportunity where we are starting to look at where do we build factories to produce this SMR, which is essentially a expanded submarine reactor. We're not reinventing the technology. We are inventing the delivery by really breaking it into Lego brick size truck transportable modules that we're going to build in factories. And so as we look out here in the West, right, tons of opportunity, not only for deployment, but also manufacturing and building a supplier network.
Hello, my name is Stacey Donahue. I am a procurement manager in Westinghouse, focusing on deployment of our AP1000 and AP300 technologies. I focus in procurement of the large structural components that go into those technologies, like the containment vessel and shield building. I don't normally deal in government affairs, so I'm coming with the perspective of the supply chain front lines, speaking with suppliers on daily and weekly basis. We've obviously been expanding our global supply chain for the last several years with the deployment of AP1000s, 6 here in the 6 operating plants, 2 here at Vogel, and we have some in China. There's 14 under construction there, and we have contract for 5 in Europe. But with Westinghouse's commitment to support President Trump's executive order, we're refocusing our efforts on finding suppliers here in the United States that can support this really aggressive timeline that we have for deployment of advanced reactor technology. So we have already over 220 suppliers in this region between Utah, Wyoming, and Idaho, but not all of those suppliers are qualified and certified to manufacture in the nuclear sphere. What we're finding is when we're speaking with suppliers here in the United States, there is a little bit of a reluctance or a hesitation in entering into the nuclear market because it's expensive, it's time consuming, and they want to understand their return on investment if they invest in the quality programs and in training their people and in establishing a nuclear safety culture. So what I hope to learn here and to help facilitate is exploring creative and innovative options on how we can perhaps fund these suppliers earlier, because waiting for the projects to go out and have these suppliers invest is not the most likely success strategy. It can take 18 months to 2 years for a commercial supplier to improve or create a quality program that's good enough to be able to fabricate in the nuclear space. So if we wait for the projects to come and then go approach these suppliers, we're going to be behind the curve.
Cool, thank you. So clearly, pretty diverse set of perspectives on supply chain issues on this panel. And as some of you hit on in your intros, the failures or constraints in the nuclear fuel cycle or for nuclear projects is really the convergence of multiple supply chain failures compounding together. So maybe can you discuss some of these gaps that contribute to the current state of the fuel cycle and some of the other supply chain challenges that you guys mentioned in your intros?
I think a couple of the points that were raised, particularly the last point about cost in the marketplace and what it actually takes to build a supply chain, and the need for some strong market signals that are a mix of private investment, but they're also a function of significant public commitment and action. We have to recognize that the vast majority of nuclear power plants built in the United States were built under our old kind of the utility, integrated vertical utilities supported by ratepayers. If our goal is to move towards a more diverse marketplace, we need to recognize and sort out what the private sector needs to take risk on and invest in, what its return will be, and what are the steps that the public sector needs to take to make that happen. And the example of governments investing in anticipation of real development, particularly building the capacity of suppliers to provide quality and safety in the delivery is important. And you can see models of that in other elements of energy around the U.S. as they focused on the solar industry or focused on advancements in the digital grid or in wind. And I think some of those same ideas have to be brought to bear in nuclear, and they need to be led not just by the federal government, but by states with a keen interest in delivering real projects in their within their communities.
So the funny thing when you talk about public investment in a lot of these spaces, I think you also have to think about what's the most fungible component that you're looking for, right? Because so like the fuel cycle, we talk about the fuel cycle, right? There's a lot of DOE investment going in the fuel cycle, but enriched uranium is a fungible component. I can give it to anybody, right? I can't give an AP1000 reactor vessel to anybody if you stand up giant manufacturing capabilities. So you have to look at across the spectrum, understand where you can get there. In public investment, you can do stuff like supplier certification efforts, right, to help out there. Those are fairly fungible when you come across there. And in fact, like people like EPRI have looked at trying to pilot, say what they call a fit for nuclear program, right, where you can actually take and, you know, bring people in and assess their supplier certification, assess what they do, and then figure out what their gaps would be for nuclear deployment, right? They actually do that in the UK. It's called Fit for Nuclear. EPRI tried to actually pilot it here. Maybe they tried to pilot it too early, because I'd say when they were doing it, they couldn't get anyone to sign up. So why? So the question is why then? Why didn't people want to sign up to go do it? Because basically EPRI was trying to pilot a program where say 5 companies come in, people evaluate it, and then they determine what those gaps are and help those companies figure out how to fix them. So I mean, programs like that could be very useful. Maybe there's a lack in delivery. Maybe someone else has to be the actual provider to maybe pilot it. But I mean, those types of things would be very useful for, you know, supplier certification, helping companies get on the way.
That's an interesting point. In recent conversations with suppliers, I think what would be very, very helpful is if we could map what it takes to go from an ISO 9000 program to an NQA1 or an ASME instant program, being able to provide that to the suppliers up front so that they can wrap their heads around what type of investment from a workforce, from a timing perspective, and from a cost perspective. Those would all be really helpful in helping the suppliers understand that their investment will be worth their while.
I think that investment has to not just focus on to get the certification, but to maintain it over time. Because some of the reluctance of suppliers to jump in is not the upfront cost, but the reality of maintaining that in anticipation of work.
Some of you did mention the workforce, human capital, supply chain elements, and the panel in a little bit talking a little bit more in depth about some of those issues. But I guess from your perspective, what are some of the opportunities or ways that ensure workforce development opportunities for nuclear projects?
I think from my perspective on workforce, it is the most important thing. It's been said several times yesterday. I just truly believe that there's a lot of talented people that more and more so want to be in this industry, but we have to find pathways to get them in here. You know, I think the color of my comments is that also, you know, if we believe everything we've said yesterday and will say today, there just needs to be a general expansion of ownership of the problems of everybody, in the sense that if there's supplier issues, how am I going to meet them halfway? How am I going to take risks? And not necessarily on the safety front, for sure, but how I'm going to risk capital, how I'm going to risk man hours to start the process, to educate suppliers, to invest in their programs for parts that I need, to invest in human capital programs that may have some state sponsorship, but everybody needs to expand their realm of influence. I mean, yesterday there was a discussion around utilities and you know, Meta and Google can make these big investments, and that's true. But there's still, for both loads and generation, there's huge interconnection issues trying to get on the grid. And so those are things that a municipal state can take ownership of. And so I think The biggest thing here is, as Stacy pointed out, there's this super long lead time. So we have to make these investments now because we're, if Pele's on track and these other programs on track, we're not really getting to commercial scale until late this decade, early next. So we need to be investing in these programs today so that we have the people, the vessels, the parts. And I think if we're waiting for everybody else to do their part to serve my business, it's going to be too long. And so I just think it's an expansion of ownership that I would definitely encourage.
Oh, let me maybe frame this kind of how we're thinking of it. So microreactors like Pele, certainly, I think we'd hope for a really accelerated timeline. I think from the SMR side, these are massive capital infrastructure projects. And when we think about timing, I think it's going to be really difficult to be before 2035 electrons on grid with an SMR. That's just being realistic. And when in our approach, we are building factories that produce the Lego bricks. The Lego bricks get sent to a site, and the entire power plant, not just the reactor, but the turbine island, everything is included in that delivery model. If you're looking at, okay, what does an apprentice look like in 2035? And where are they today? That is your 7th, 8th grade freshman in high school. And you have to frame a track that is delivering the skills, not only for reactor manufacturing and deployment, but also supply chain down to the fuel level and also in your broader supply chain. One of the things we were talking about yesterday was heavy castings and forgings. I mean, I have no idea how you spark a interest in a kid's mind to go into heavy castings and forgings in the United States, especially when we don't have that capacity right now. That's a huge need, and there's a lot that needs to be done there. The other thing that I think from a government policy standpoint where nuclear has a bit of a disadvantage, and this is coming from an aerospace, I was formerly in aerospace, still am a little bit, but the Department of Commerce through the NIST program has a series of manufacturing USA institutes. So these are kind of like tech hubs, but they are essentially rapid prototyping facilities, government-owned, public-private partnership embedded projects within those. But they touch all of the national strategic technology ambitions except for nuclear. So AI has its own manufacturing institute. Lightweighting alloy for U.S. Department of Defense aircraft has like 3. We have biofabrication. We have photovoltaics has its own manufacturing USA institute. And what that allows for is sub-suppliers and small businesses to come in and leverage government equipment to start churning out prototypes, de-risking. They can take designs from reactor companies. They could do that, I guess. But in the aerospace world, they take engine designs. They start understanding, okay, what alloy do we need to make? How do we make it as cheap as possible? And then you have universities that begin to kind of plug in as well and say, okay, we can see where the technical need is going to be in 5 years. So let's start doing coursework so that we can deliver folks right into that pipeline. So, and ask for this room, especially here in the West where there really aren't a lot of these are concentrated elsewhere. Go chase a new manufacturing USA institute for nuclear. Maybe do it at INL, maybe do it in Salt Lake. I think there's an absolute need, and you need a hub to begin to innovate and do rapid prototyping around that is accessible to a lot of these sub-tier suppliers.
I think one of the things you have to do is, kind of, given that time frame, is to invest in the clear thing that we do need. We know that we need a significantly expanded workforce for the modernization and expansion of the grid from generation. And there are a lot of, as was pointed out, there are a lot of comparable skill sets. It was mentioned yesterday. The people that built the last nuclear power plant didn't just stick around and wait for another one. The workforce went where there were jobs. It's pretty well demonstrated that there is a demand for those high-skilled jobs, and we need to prepare for them. At the same time, we look at how to accelerate the market. I mean, if we look at nuclear, you can kind of predict within the next few years what conceivably could be ready, even if we accelerate permitting timeframes. It's dealing with existing capacity, perhaps moving into conversion from old coal plants where you have a lot of infrastructure in place. so you can look at a realistic time frame and plan your jobs for that. But we need more of them.
Well, one thing's always funny with nuclear, we always talk about we're special. And maybe in nuclear, there is a bit of special aspect, right? But the supply chain, there's people that can build components for other industries can also build components for nuclear power plants. And that's what we have to remember, right? How do we latch on to what's going on overall versus just we need to treat this as our own specific nuclear problem? Because there's more than just the nuclear aspect here that's happening. And the other thing I always, we did supply chain assessment a few years ago before a lot of the demand here and interest is taken off. But when we talk to suppliers, outside of having firm orders so they can make investments, number 2 and number 3 on the list of kind of gaps and challenges was the workforce, right? There was a workforce for them to build components. People then, you have a lot of aging workforce as well. So you have people retiring out, and how do you backfill all that? So that is a thing. I've always said, at some point, if people want to figure out how to make more investment, maybe you need to figure out how to get micro involved and, get some more PR out there for ourselves, through Micro's network, because he talks about dirty jobs, talks about, the skilled trades. They have Micro Works Foundation. I'm not an investor in it, but I just follow it, and I know he has this thing where they go put scholarships out there for people to go learn trades and then go work in these trades. So stuff like that would be very helpful for nuclear.
I think, and from my perspective, as Chris and Matt both pointed out, there's an opportunity to reskill and upskill for sure. But I think there is a marketing piece for that we can take advantage of right now. Nuclear is of interest. I think our own on-campus recruiting efforts have seen a lot of interest. And I think one of the things is nuclear is so sort of like magic for a lot of folks. And the delta between what you know as a technician, welder, pipe fitter, laborer, being able to do that on a normal job and being able to do that on a nuclear job is actually not that much. There's some nuclear safety, nuclear appreciation. You have some of your workforce needs ANSI certs. You need to appreciate these things. You need to learn some of them, but this is not creating a new worker from scratch. And so, I think focusing on colleges and trade schools is important, but there's also nuclear. I mean, it's just amazing to say that it is a growth industry now. I started out my career in nuclear in the submarine force. I didn't spend some time in it because it didn't feel like a growth industry. It is now. And there are other non-growth industries that we can reskill from as well. And a lot of them are in these Western states. So if you've been working on a mining job site, all these other things, you can get into nuclear without a ton of effort. But you have to have those programs to support them. And I think that's where I like that there is a larger demand signal. There's not just one off-taker for human capital now. There's all these different opportunities. And how do we create the supply side of this equation to feed those industries over time?
One more thing to add, sorry. If at the state level, if there are initiatives like the Admit Utah that are ensuring that students that are graduating from high school are able to enter into a 4-year university program, expanding those programs to also allow students to choose a trade school or a technical program or a community college where they can learn either trades or maybe even just the associate's degree that will later feed into a bachelor's degree. I think these are some things that the states can do at the state level that would help encourage our kids who are 7th, 8th, 9th graders entering in high school, understanding that track is available to them, especially if maybe they're not inclined to go and be an engineer. We need those people too, but I think it's a little bit easier for people who are inclined to academically to get scholarships and attend a 4-year university. And somehow I love the idea of leveraging micro. That's amazing. It's helping students not feel like they're degraded somehow and moving into a trade. So expanding these initiatives at the state level to make sure students understand that is available to them and that it's a valued skill set in this country is really important.
Awesome. Before I turn it over to audience questions, any closing thoughts from you all? Things we didn't hit on, things you want to mention?
Can I chime in with one just in terms of a call to action for this organization from your states? So one what is nuclear going up against? Where are the competition? Shipbuilding. So much momentum nationally towards shipbuilding. And a lot of the skill sets, a lot of the suppliers, are having to choose between the two. So I think we need, both from a state level, but also engage your congressional delegations, engage the White House. Let's get some clarity around nuclear workforce is equal to the need for shipbuilding. It just, the next geopolitical competition is going to be one with electrons just as much as it's going to be cutting waves. The other thing would be to ensure that we don't isolate natural gas. So natural gas in terms of pipeline jobs, in terms of large infrastructure, energy infrastructure development, I think the timing here could work where natural gas isn't going anywhere. It's absolutely going to be a critical part of the American energy future, but there will come a time where we're going to get way more efficient at building natural gas capacity. We've been, exceptional at that of late. Let's make sure that we partner with natural gas to both encourage a joint workforce there. And I think, pipe fitting, welding, skills that they've done excellent in, I think nuclear could absolutely take a front foot and capture some of that.
I think building on this, the idea of partnering, and particularly partnering for the long haul, and the role that states can play in not just bringing business and the private sector to the table, but bringing the community along and being clear about what are the economic opportunities that are associated with energy and with nuclear specifically. What are realistic time frames to achieve them, and what is the mix of investment that has to be made, public and private, to get there? Because I think bringing the public along for the ride and in partnership is what's going to sustain the nuclear market and help it grow over a long period of time. And it's going to take some time.
I have one final point too. If we could think about perhaps expanding funding that's available from the DOE Loan Program Office or from the Defense Production Act, and expand the availability of those funds beyond the developers, but directly to the supply chain, it could help the suppliers. It would de-risk their investment into entering into the nuclear market. So if we could look at creative ways to make that funding available directly to the suppliers, whether it's a tax investment credit at the state level for investing in equipment, workforce, or machinery that we need, so we can move some of these technologies like the ultra large forgings that we can only get in other countries like Korea, and bring that capacity and that technology and that know-how back to the United States, so that when we do go to deploy these projects to this really aggressive timeline, we're able to deliver on time with the proper quality, but also made in America. Because right now, some of the capacity and the technology that we need to do that isn't available here.
So I would say my parting words would be basically don't wait. If you're always waiting for some other piece to come, I think a nuclear future is going to be great for everybody. Everybody will benefit. The real winners, especially on the economic front, are investing now. I'm not going to wait for the human capital supply chain. I'm not going to wait for all the supply chain pieces. I'm investing, risking capital man hours now. If we can create that demand signal from a user side, then the supply signal will come. But that doesn't abdicate the role that states play, because again, states are here in the West are frenemies of sorts, right? Work together but want to win. If you're going to invest in the workforce soon, you're going to get more of this nuclear investment sooner as well. And so I think the people who are willing to move now, to risk hours and capital now, are going to be the big winners. And then the big winners will drive the long tail of future expansion where everybody wins in a nuclear future.
I'm gonna open it up for audience questions. I see a couple hands here.
I'll ask one as I head over to the folks. But one of the things I think I've heard you say is that to a large degree, we don't even have the infrastructure built to supply the chain on some of this stuff, if that made sense. So who has?
Could you explain it a little bit more? I'm not sure it was clear.
We don't have the infrastructure that can supply the stuff that we need to build this stuff out. We may be able to get it from another country.
Not necessarily the expansion that is called for. It's kind of like Chris pointed out. You've got a supply chain that is providing a sustainment of the existing infrastructure. The existing infrastructure is strong. It's operating safely. It's operating reliably. It's reasonable to anticipate that some of the near-term additions, that there is adequate supply chain, that there's a clear enough path to project. The broader expansion that's anticipated, I think, consensus.
That's what I'm talking about.
Yeah, I mean, so and you have to be careful. Depending on where you go, right, there's many different reactor technologies, designs out there. So if you're talking structural components, right, a lot of things that go into it, it becomes very reactor specific very quick. Right, you can't build an AP1000 vessel in the U.S. We can't do that, right? That's an easy answer. When it comes to smaller designs, then you're kind of, maybe there's some forgings you can do, but we don't have there's no vertically integrated companies, right? You basically, someone has to go forge something, and then someone has to go take it to a fabricator and get them to go fabricate it and put it all together. You can do some of the smaller components, but you may still be relying on some international friends as well, for depending on how big your vessels are, steam generators, et cetera.
Yeah. And who's got the master plan of what all we need where to make all of this work?
That's the multi-billion-dollar question, right?
Yeah.
But I think there are some ideas that came up yesterday that we can think about as we're structuring policy and what we're talking about investment. Ideas like yesterday that were raised around standardization. Every investor wants a certain level of uniqueness. Kind of, we're talking about first of its kind of investment, but ultimately, if the stuff is going to be scaled, you're going to need to standardize what can be standardized and look to create some transparency in the marketplace about what's being developed and where there are supply chain gaps, so that the market can in fact respond to it, and that government can look to either incent or require a move towards standardization. That's the only way the stuff's going to scale at on a more quick path. I think the other thing from a kind of regulatory standpoint, there's a lot of talk about permitting reform. We really need to look at how the requirements that have generated a lot of safety, but also a lot of process, how those requirements flow down, and whether there are ones that can be taken out or standardized along the way. But standardization is a key idea from yesterday that needs to be brought into the development and the scaling of the market today.
Would you all agree? And I think it was Matt that said, you're thinking 2035 before.
Well, it just depends on how big the project is, right? So you might be able to move a little faster at a smaller scale. You might be able to do a test reactor at a smaller scale. But for a multi-acre structure, Rolls-Royce SMR, AP1000, AP300, where it's like building a stadium. And even there's also, you have a firm lead time on a lot of these parts. You need the contracts. So there's only so much you can accelerate, and then you get all the way down your supply chain to a point where you're talking about minerals flow. And so being realistic, and the other the approach that one of the things dictating the Rolls-Royce timeline to the U.S. of 2035, let's say, is how our model is shaped. Is when we looked at the challenge set of how do you ensure a level of cost overrun mitigation and guarantee. The only place, hyperscaler funding and PPAs are wonderful here in the U.S. That is not as good as a state-backed utility in Europe that doesn't have access to cheap natural gas and can't abandon a project saying, we're going to select your design and complete it. So from our standpoint, where we're sitting, where we have, an order book already in Europe, we want to make sure that when we have our first of a kind in the U.S., as much risk has been chucked out, not on the back of the U.S. taxpayer. And so in order to marry, again, that financial challenge with the reality of the risk reduction, that's also going to drive a bit of a timeline. Now, I think, the race is not to the first of a kind or the fifth of a kind, it's to the 10th or 20th of a kind. And the U.S. should absolutely win that race. Our ambition as Rolls-Royce is to have the U.S. win that race. But it is critical that we do it in a way where the funding comes together and the risk model comes together at the same time.
So in 2035, we'll have gone through how many administrations? And I've been around long enough where I've seen the cycles. I've been in geothermal since 2005, and to try to make a living in geothermal from 2005 was pretty tough until there's been some new technology like the Fervo Energy Project in Milford in Utah. But how do you, I've been in first of a kind carbon capture projects, and those are waning now. Ethanol's gone. How do you assure, I guess a purpose-built contractor like myself, that in 2035 there will be projects? I mean, how do we get the administration on board or laws on board to do that?
So you're looking for a 10-year assurance? Okay. No, I mean, I think we're in a different state now. I have a lot of family and friends in the real estate business, and I laugh that, electricity used to be a plug in a spreadsheet. And then we went through a period where everybody's looking under rocks for extra megawatts. We're still sort of in that period, and now you're looking to actually procure your megawatts. I think this time is different because of the pull from the market as opposed to the push from the nuclear nerds about all the other benefits of nuclear. So I think there's durability, there's bipartisanship around nuclear as well, and there's just some attributes why this will have staying power. But I think to Matt's point, 2035 is the probably realistic time frame. I would just encourage us all to be unrealistic in the sense that, it's an industry that has 40 years of ingrained thinking about how to get things done, and it doesn't have to be that way. We've seen it be faster and other stuff. Granted, state-backed can help a lot of things, but I think if you look really creatively at siting, permitting, design, partnerships, I think there's a unique spot right now where if you execute, there's almost limitless access to capital. The types of capital are an interesting mix, but you can do it, and I think you can execute within this decade if you get out of that sort of fixed mindset and start to think about unique ways to approach at least first-of-a-kind projects.
I think one of the other things that particularly states and industry can work together better on is getting a much clearer picture on energy demand. I mean, the reality is infrastructure of any kind takes a while, and 2035 is not an unrealistic market transition kind of time frame. But part of the problem is we have wildly different views of what energy demand is going to do. That hampers state planning, it hampers private investment. The more we know that demand, kind of high, medium, and low, is going to increase for electricity, and not just from hyperscalers, but from other things like electrification of transportation or modernization of manufacturing. If we get a clearer picture of energy demand, someone will win the race, right? Someone will supply it, someone will make the investment. And at that point, then it's kind of an economic competitiveness battle. So I think if we had better forecasting, better and more transparency of how it was built, it would help infrastructure investment generally and help innovation specifically.
Let me just quick clarification for our friends in the media. 2035 notional number, mid-2030s, right? But in terms of, we are not going to move into the U.S. market unless the key enablers are met, including an assurance that the market will be there. We do feel like it's going to be there. And I think part of it is when folks have skin in the game, you're going to get the project across the line. It's how do you put the skin in the game in the right way? And that's going to fall on us as the OEM to have some skin in the game. It's going to, Secretary Wright has been so aggressive with saying you need to have the right credit of offtake. And that's why we're looking to the hyperscalers. But I think there's things also DOD can be doing that the U.S. government can be doing as an offtake partner and states can be doing, right? If you have state assets, bring those to bear from a PPA context. That's just going to, enhance the ability to keep skin in the game and to be a forcing function to allow the monetary aspects of all this to come together.
So a question for Chris and one for Stacy. Chris, you made, and perhaps I'm hypersensitive, but you made a comment about some people were of retirement age and were going to leave the workforce. My question is, are you telling me it's time to go? Or that wasn't personal, that was just in general?
Correct. Yes.
All right. I feel better. I feel better. A quick comment. We've heard several times that we have a workforce problem. The company I'm with funded its first scholarship at the University of Idaho 4 years ago in atomic. And that is going to give us doctors, it's going to give us masters, and it doesn't take a huge amount of money. We've had several candidates writing their thesis, and what they needed was a $5,000 stipend over the summer for them to finish their thesis or their paper. I think industry should respond to this need for workforce development. If you need it, then go develop it. I don't think we need to have 100 government programs. This is going to be solved at some master level, in my humble opinion. Stacy, you seem to me to be conflicted. On the one hand, the parts you need for the AP 1000 are not able to be sourced domestically. But on the other hand, you have AP 1000s being implemented in China. That seems to me difficult to square. Can you explain that?
So China was able to basically build their own supply chain. That's how they solved that problem. They also commit to procuring long lead items very early so that they're on site, reduces final investment decision risk. And we could do a better job of that here. We could commit to long lead procurement items early so that when those items are on site, it makes it easier for the owners to make their final investment decision. And also with respect to the supply chain not necessarily being available here or the AP 1000s, we're talking about some specific manufacturing capacities, the large forgings and castings. That type of equipment isn't available here now, but it could be. It could be with the right investments, with the right suppliers. If they see the return on investment, we're seeing over and over again that the suppliers are willing to invest, but they want to ensure that the return on investment is there. They're looking for partnerships, either from the developer, from the OEM, from the utility, from the government. That's what the suppliers are looking for. So I think we can build it here, and we should build it here domestically to support domestic projects. On the Vogel projects, we did have to source large components from overseas. But that doesn't mean that we have to keep doing that for the next 30, 40, 50, 80 years, for as long as any of these advanced reactor designs are going to be in play.
Thank you. Paul Hughes, State of Kansas. Just kind of borrowing from our conversation yesterday, we were looking at 11 states that were part of a first movers pact, and that caught my attention. And I looked at it closer, 9 of them are east of the Mississippi. And as the state, we have an interest in this industry, and it's the reason we're here. And so we want to solve for that. We can help solve for this problem on workforce, and we want to. The issue we have is exporting talent, where we're building the talent and it goes somewhere else outside of the state, so that the taxpayers benefit left, because it's a highly mobile workforce. So 2 points and a question. One is that the Western states may be disproportionately disadvantaged when it comes to workforce if all of the opportunities on the East Coast. And I missed my second point, so I'll go straight to the question. So who's doing this the best in your view today? Which states are doing the best job at producing talent? Because when we were digging deeper into the industry, my earlier point, we went to a couple of West Coast companies to meet their teams, only to meet graduates from Wisconsin and K-State. So who's doing the best job of this in the western part of the country?
Can I throw one just on Kansas? So From an aerospace side, think Kansas is among the best in the country at doing a talent development and retention. So what Wichita State has done in partnership, and major credit to Senator Moran for leading a lot of this effort, you have programs that get kids into manufacturing at an early stage before, and then they can, as they're leaving high school, they're in the factory, and then they're doing coursework for a 2-year, 4-year degree in parallel. You have a job in the region, you have academic ties in the region, and you come out with incremental growth in your pay for the students. I don't know anywhere in the U.S., because we haven't built nuclear in for so long, that is doing that. So I think Kansas is, first of all, a wonderful working model for how to build and retain talent in an industry. I think from, again, just speaking as Rolls-Royce, where we are, there are the states that can throw money at the problem, Texas being one. And Texas has such significant amounts, orders of magnitude more going to this in the form of grants than other states. There seems to be a way for risk reduction to be implemented there, which then draws contracts, that then draws firm workforce development issues. Where I think, though, the West has an advantage is in, again, going back to the demographics challenge. The kids that are going to be staffing these plants from mid-2030s to 2050 are, young age right now, and we have some of the youngest demographic states in the country in this room, Utah being, top of that list. So I think if you can leverage that wave of demography well, West has an advantage in putting that together. But I couldn't tell you, I don't think we are at a place right now where we've got any working examples, because we just haven't built nuclear at capacity in this country last decade plus.
I think from a state perspective, you look at it, right? Economists think labor is mobile, because it is, but most labor doesn't want to be mobile, right? And so at the end of the day, you have to provide the opportunity for somebody to stay where they are. And so the states that do this best right now are the ones who have had nuclear for a long time. If you look at the concentration of operating reactors, but also supply chain pieces in the fuel supply, it's concentrated on the East Coast and in Washington State. Washington State does great around this stuff because they've had the historical DNA. But if a state can create opportunity, and I'm a bit biased, but I also think it's for good reason, because they are generally more labor intensive, is if you can get the supply chain pieces for nuclear, not just fuel, but also pipes, parts, valves, there's just more opportunity to stay where you were grown, raised, rooted, educated. And that's how states are going to do this well moving into the future.
Thanks for all of your insight. I have one suggestion, because there's a lot of interest in this room, keeps coming up. The students that are in middle school and high school right now, question is how to get them into this ecosystem. Show them. Take them on field trips. Bring people to the schools. On my time, I go and visit every high school that'll have me in my area to talk about nuclear energy and energy in general. And then students have an idea. Their worldview is what they've experienced. Westinghouse has a program where they bring students every year to their Waltz Mill site and shows them around. And at Waltz Mill, they build things, they test things. You can show them opportunities for what skilled labor looks like, what engineers do, what managers do, and they get that experience, and then they see themselves in that job in the future. The second thing for the supply chain for the panel, traceability is a challenge for parts and components, and it's one of the QC issues for the supply chain. What are your views on the actual benefit of moving to ISO 9001, which most suppliers are already qualified for, instead of pure traceability for parts? Traceability, for the folks in the room that don't know it, you have to follow from the mineral, the mine, all the way to the part where it's installed. You have to keep tags or stamps on that material at every step. And that adds overhead, but it also adds another quality control program you have to have, even if the bolt is the exact same as the one you would sell in Home Depot.
Well, I'll jump in. Tracking and tracing is going to be an essential part of providing appropriate security. It's there are approaches to tracking through essentially advanced manufacturing type approaches, using standardized certification processes. It's coming. We need to get ready for it. I wouldn't necessarily pick a winner. Let's use this particular process, but we need to just recognize it's going to be here, and there are ways to do it. And the more that we standardize the way that it's done, the better off we will all be building a supply chain that is appropriately secure. I think you can look again, let's just talk about modernization of the grid as a whole. There's been huge concern about security and tracking and creating responsibility all the way down the supply chain. It's not going to be any different in the expansion of nuclear, so we just need to get ready for it. But I'm not going to pick any more than I'm going to pick my favorite child, right?
Great. Please join me in thanking our panelists. Thank you all so much for being here. We're going to take a very short break while we transition our folks for our next panel. Okay, we are going to kick off our next panel. So if people would take your seats, or if you want to have conversations, head outside. We're gonna get started with our next panel. People would take their seats, we can get things going. Please sit down. No. Okay, we're gonna get this panel started. As we just talked about, the fuel cycle depends on secure supplies of uranium enrichment, fabrication, and advanced fuels. This next panel will explore how to strengthen and diversify the fuel cycle to ensure reliable, affordable, and timely deployment of nuclear energy. I'm gonna let our panelists introduce themselves before we dive in.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Abby, and thank you to the Western Governors Association. Of course, Governor Cox, appreciate your pulling this all together. So my name is Curtis Moore, and I'm the Senior VP of Marketing and Corporate Development for a company called Energy Fuels. We're headquartered in Denver, Colorado, and we are currently the largest supplier of uranium in the United States. So uranium, of course, is the very first step in the production of nuclear energy, at least for the vast majority of nuclear technologies. You need the stuff that we produce. So we produce uranium in Arizona, in Utah, also in Wyoming. Those are some of the best uranium mining and uranium production areas in the United States. We also are the owner of the only conventional uranium mill in the United States. If you go back 30, 40, 50 years, there were on the order of 25 or 30 uranium mills in the United States. Today there's one, and we own it. It has been a long slog. It's been a very difficult industry market for us over those many years, as things like Fukushima happened. That really depressed the uranium market. Countries like Russia, like Kazakhstan, increased production and also increased a lot of imports into the United States. That has created a lot of challenges for companies like us. Now, we have been able to keep the company going, keep the workforce together. We currently have about 100 employees down at the White Mesa Mill in southeast Utah, plus another 100 employees at our various mines around the country. But it is a very good time for us right now. Nuclear utilities are coming back into the market. There are efforts to, there was a Russian uranium ban that was passed a couple of years ago. That was a big boost to our industry. We have contracts with the domestic utilities, and we're delivering into those contracts today. We deliver our material to a conversion facility. Conversion is the next step in the nuclear fuel cycle, where you essentially take our natural uranium concentrate and you gasify it. You refine it and gasify it and create this uranium hexafluoride that would then be delivered to Mary's facility, for instance. So that's where we fit in.
Yes, thank you. I'm Josh Jarrell. I am the director of our nuclear fuel cycle science and technology here at Idaho National Lab. So welcome. I hope you've enjoyed your visit. It's great to have this group here and to be part of the panel. I'll just maybe quickly touch on a few things on the fuel cycle and what INL is doing. Maybe I'll start with INL. And I am a contractor for the Department of Energy, but I do not represent the Department of Energy. So as we talk about some of the federal policy, I will not be speaking for DOE by any means. But from a fuel cycle perspective, here at INL, we are looking at ways to help deploy technologies, demonstrate technologies that can move the fuel cycle forward, whether that's in mining, conversion, enrichment, deconversion, and then on the backside, do we consider recycling the fuel? Do we store it? Do we dispose of it? Like these sort of things. And so INL, as a national laboratory, our job is really to move technology to market and to help some of these companies with these technologies, demonstrate them so that they can sort of get them over the hump and deploy them. And I think it's really important as we start seeing nuclear energy and such a huge amount of interest, both from private and federal customers with nuclear energy, that we don't forget about the nuclear fuel cycle. And that's something that in the past has been a struggle. And I think it's something that we'll need to continue to really focus on. So I'm thrilled to be on this panel. Thank you.
Thank you so much. My name is Mary Newmeyer, and I lead U.S. government affairs for the Urenco Group. Urenco is the largest Western supplier of uranium enrichment services. We operate a plant in New Mexico in the United States. It's the only commercial enrichment facility in the United States. We also operate plants in the UK, the Netherlands, and Germany. In the United States, we've been operating since 2010, producing enriched uranium, and over the years we have expanded our operations to meet market demand, customer needs. As the market declined in the late 2018 timeframe, we stopped building out our facility, but following the invasion of Ukraine by Russia, there has been an increased demand for non-Russian fuels. So based on contracts and customer demand, we have been expanding our facility in New Mexico. We've also been expanding our facilities in Europe. Just a word about our facilities, just following up on the discussion earlier and the talk about the workforce. We are located in southeastern New Mexico. It's in the Permian Basin. It's sometimes called the Energy Plex because you have oil, gas, wind, solar, nuclear. And as part of our efforts since 2010, we have really, we regard it as a great privilege to be in the community we are in, Eunice, New Mexico. We are located near Hobbs. We're also very close to Andrews, Texas. And one of the things we really have prioritized is the development of the workforce. And we actually have a program, we'll just talk about education. We actually have a program for fifth graders, which we call the Ritchie Enrichment Program. And our employees go out and meet with students, in fifth grade students, really, I think 1,800 students a year. And we'll give them a little bit of an introduction to nuclear. We also have in Hobbs a technical school. It actually opened a number of years ago, and I think Mike Rowe came for the grand opening. But it's a wonderful school. It's intended to help develop skills. So we help sponsor the technical school. We also work with the junior college on a degree program, and then we also have an internship program at the site. So we are now at the point where we actually have some of those fifth graders coming to work at the site. So that's been really a wonderful way to help cultivate a local workforce, which has been really so important to our facility. So in all events, very happy to be here. Thank you for the invitation. The Western Governors, wonderful organization. I know from my past life and working on Capitol Hill how important it is. And anyway, just very grateful to be here. Thank you.
And I'm Chris Lowe. I'm the CEO at Nusano. Thank you very much for having me to be a part of this today. Nusano is a pretty cool company. We don't rewrite the laws of physics, but we do think we execute them to a level that was not thought possible at commercial scale. So we do that in a few different ways. Number one, isotope production. We're bringing our plant online as we speak. And that'll be relevant when we talk about fuel recycling, because isotopes actually are a key element of that opportunity. Number two is a stable isotope program where we produce our own starting material, removing that international dependence. Number three is the separation technologies, and that's where we get into HALEU. We're in the midst of, with the help of the folks here at INL, with the help of the folks at Hill Air Force Base, we'll be scaling up our first HALEU production facility. We'll be delivering customer samples here in 2026, and we'll be delivering production quantities starting in Q1 27. A key element of that stability is twofold for me. One is domestic stability. We'll have, for all of our technologies, we have 100% domestic supply chain. That was important a few years ago. That's extra important now for the reasons stated for sure. Number two is because of the efficiency of our technology, we'll be able to do it at price points that we think enable markets. As we talk to our customers in the SMR place, we think there's that, the $25,000 a kilogram and the like for HALEU is not a sustainable price to enable that hyper growth that we need. We think it's got to be down at the $10,000, $12,000 level and getting lower, frankly. So that's our goal. That's what we're going to start out delivering. That's not something that's going to be a 5 or 10-year goal, but that's our mission. And we feel like that's our obligation for how we commercialize that. Thank you.
Great. Well, diving into some of the policy topics here, we talked a little bit about it yesterday, but some of the recent executive orders and federal actions coming out around nuclear, how has the current policy developments sort of shaped the landscape here for the fuel cycle?
Yeah, no, this is honestly for our industry, it's been a big change over the last several months. It's things like actually let's say the last couple of years. I mean, what really started was Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Russia is a major supplier of uranium conversion and enrichment to the United States and the rest of the world. They use a lot of their Cold War infrastructure that was transferred essentially over to Rosatom. That's the state-owned Russian nuclear company. They saw, I think, a bit of a vacuum created with the United States and other countries kind of stepping away from uranium and nuclear fuel and all that, and they filled that vacuum. And they became, frankly, a low-cost, long-term, quite reliable supplier. If you talk to nuclear utilities in the U.S. and abroad, they at that time, let's say pre-Ukraine, they were very pleased with their Russian relationships. Well, that all changed when Russia invaded Ukraine. A lot of these utilities had grown extremely dependent on Russian uranium. If you recall, at that time, there was almost an immediate ban on Russian oil, gas, and coal and other imports and sanctions and all that. It took I believe it was almost over 2 years for the Russian uranium ban to actually be passed by Congress and signed into law. And even with that Russian uranium ban, there's waivers. So even today, we are still importing a whole lot of Russian uranium into the United States. But that is going away here in the next couple of years. That has been a big driver for prices of uranium and, well, SWU, separative work units for enrichment and conversion and all that has gone up considerably because that's really where Russia has a stranglehold. But also, uranium, U-308, the natural uranium that we produce, that's also gone up considerably. And utilities have been self-sanctioning. I think they saw a lot of risk in continuing that dependency on Russia, and so they've been voluntarily reducing their Russian imports. That's been good for us in the fuel cycle. Now, there's been some very minor indications of increased uranium imports from China. Again, we're not out there throwing up the alarm bells quite yet, but still, we got to make sure that we don't trade Russian dependence for Chinese dependence. And so no, that's been a big policy change that we've seen. There's been increased talk. I mean, Secretary Wright just last week talked about resuming the Russian uranium, the strategic uranium reserve. This was an initiative that President Trump championed in his first term. He wanted to see $150 million per year for 10 years, so $1.5 billion to create a strategic uranium reserve. That got appropriated $75 million one time, and that was it. We sold about 300,000 pounds into that uranium reserve, but Secretary Wright just made a allusion to that last week, which I think we'd be very, very supportive of. But that's just a couple of things off the top of my mind.
Sure. Maybe I'll just I wanted to set the stage on domestic capabilities in general, maybe picking up on that point. I mean, just for our current fleet of light water reactors, we do enrichment for about a third of the SWUs in your facility domestically. Everything else is imported. Mining is less than 10%. Conversion, we have one plant. A lot of these challenges for our light water fleet, if we look across domestic capabilities, exist. And now we're talking about advanced reactors and recycling and deployment of a whole new infrastructure around high-assay low-enriched uranium. And so I think it's important for us to realize we're in a really dramatic situation where there's going to be a lot of moving parts and pieces. And I think it's important to maybe highlight two areas in the executive orders, going back to the question, that I think will, have even a larger impact on this country over the next couple of years. And one is actually on recycling. So in the executive orders, there is conversations about basically reevaluating recycling spent fuel, not just for the uranium, but for some other valuable transuranics. Historically, it's been not necessarily fully supported at the administration level. And so that's an area where we at INL have done a lot of recycling and reprocessing activities. We're currently doing that. I think we're going to see a big shift in that area. And then also on the very back end, there's some specific language in the executive orders to develop a comprehensive spent fuel management plan for this country to include storage, disposal, as well as include recycling and processing and impacts from that. So I think we're going to see a lot of change going forward as these advanced reactors come online, and we see how these executive orders roll out, or not roll out, but implementation rolls out.
Yeah, I think just adding, I think the executive orders, by prioritizing nuclear power as a key form of baseload power for the country to meet these enormous demands in technology and industrial, capital-intensive industries, et cetera, is the combination of prioritizing the importance of nuclear as baseload power, together with including timelines and objectives, goals, is very important. I think it was mentioned yesterday, there is a sort of a forcing function, and I think that we as a company have already seen an increase in fuel contracting to support some of the projects, including the project some of the projects here at INL. And so I think there have been a few announcements by some of those companies. And we also just last week had the first announcement of a commercial enrichment services contract for high assay low enriched uranium enriched to the highest level. So I think that it's been a real driver for action in the industry, and where there's been a hesitancy, it's really served a function to move different parts of the industry into action.
Just two incremental things real quick. One is, I obviously love all the trend and whatnot in the licensing and regulation, but I think there's a unique opportunity that a lot of these advanced reactors may come with a kind of built-in solution on the concept of recycling as well. So from a licensing perspective, if I was sitting in Washington, I might put prioritization on that and be able to say, gee, somebody who's coming to me with a fully baked solution, maybe I should fast track that. Maybe I should work a little bit with a stronger urgency on that. And that may help me de-risk against future administration changes as well, in terms of ensuring that this mindset and this need we have today is there. The second thing that I would throw in is at a very macro level, and we talked about this a little bit in prior panels, but what's in it for the consumer? Why everybody sees the charts that get thrown up on your favorite news channel about growing demand. All the average consumer knows is that my power bill has gone up 4x, 5x in the last 5 years for no particular reason. And so how does this solve my problem as an individual voter, an individual consumer? That might help with the hearts and minds as well.
And, going back to some of the recycling items that you guys mentioned, are there specific policy levers or other sort of innovations that can incentivize some of what you were talking about beyond within the executive orders?
I mean, I'll jump in front of that if you don't mind. Yeah, won't be the first time I led with my face. So no, I mean, to me, I think it's got to be. I think there's plenty of ideas out there, and there's more than ideas. There's really talented people, both in public and private industry, that have been doing work on this. What the federal level could help with is providing a forum, a safe place, if you will, to work on this. Josh mentioned the concept of even the storage solutions. I mean, just having a little bit more cohesiveness from a federal level would help. I think would help everybody coalesce around the idea of, what do I do with my waste? Where does it go? And if you establish, places like, INL for a public-private partnership. That to me would be a great next step to kind of formalize some of the research around this and help get it to commercial scale.
On sort of the partnerships, collaboration topic, are there specific approaches that have proven successful at building those partnerships? And
I mean, for me, I'll speak to what's about to happen in front of us. So, you know, we're in the midst of finalizing a space right here at INL. That's huge for us because obviously in terms of HALEU production, you can't do that anywhere. So the ability to be able to co-locate and to, refine analytical methods, produce customer samples, that's invaluable in terms of our timeline. And it helps us, we can engage with folks who have been doing some of this work, learn from them, accelerate our programs. It's a win-win for us. So again, that public-private to me, that should be encouraged over and over again.
I mean, I'll just speak from INL's perspective. We're working with almost every advanced company in the fuel cycle at this point. And because we have unique capabilities that the federal government has invested in over 50, 60 years. So it doesn't make any sense for these companies to replicate those capabilities internally. Come here, work with us. So we're working closely with several companies from a research perspective on how do we demonstrate their technologies. There's certain work that can't be done anywhere other than a national lab. And so we partner through SPPs and CRADAs and other mechanisms and try to get the work out, get it done and get it done quickly. And that's something that I will say on the executive orders, I think we're seeing a real benefit at the laboratory where some of our processes and procedures that are being reevaluated to improve efficiencies and really be responsive to some of these companies. And so I see we're already partnering with these companies, and I see that ramping up significantly over the next 1, 2, 3 years.
I'm going to turn it over to Troy, who has a couple other questions for you, and then we'll do audience questions.
And then we'll go everybody else. You've touched on a little bit on the back end of the cycle, and Mary, I know I was at the committee before you were, and I'm sure you dealt with that too. I feel like we've gone backward with what to do at the tail end of this whole cycle. Like if you were the king, what would you do with a storage disposal final solution for the back end waste?
You might be referring to my past life at DOE and working on spent fuel issues. I'll just say, in terms of the enrichment process, that is not a process that results in high-level radioactive waste. It's low-level material. But as was said, the administration is clearly seeking to relook at the path forward and to try to identify an approach that will work. And so it's a challenge. There are other parts of the world that have been moving forward, and so I think those will be a model for the U.S. And I think it's a part of the fuel cycle that must be addressed, and it's a key issue. But for the upfront enrichment process, it's not a spent fuel issue.
And let me maybe jump in on that. So, one, I don't speak for the Department of Energy, but two, the department is obviously relooking at sort of the strategy for spent fuel recycling storage. One of the things that INL and the lab to bring to the table is we've been dealing with spent fuel for a very long time. We have decades of experience of storing it safely, efficiently, and a lot of the new fuels that are being considered, we have historic fuels that look very, very similar. And so when we talk about storage of spent fuel, I think because it's been done so safely and almost effectively, we've sort of gotten to the point where the government needs to step in, but there's not an emergency on the back end. Because again, with light water reactor fuel, while it's not ideal for it to be stored on site indefinitely, it is safely being stored on site indefinitely without impacting public or safety. And so it's one of those things where, as somebody that feels like nuclear energy is going to produce a lot of our power, and we need to handle and deal with the waste, in our generation that gets used to that power, I think we need to deal with it. But it's not, I will just frame it, it's not a safety concern to the public for that purpose. We've done it really well. It's just, how do we effectively do it going forward?
And if I could jump in real fast on that as well, and this is probably more my personal opinion on spent fuel, having spent 20 years in this industry now. Again, it's spent. I feel like it gets sort of an outsized bit of attention, the spent fuel issue. It is an issue, something we have to deal with long term, but it's not a reason to oppose nuclear energy. I feel like a lot of anti-nuclear people tend to kind of latch onto that as if that's something that can't be solved. It can be solved. Other countries around the world are solving it. We're not drowning in this stuff. It is being safely handled on site. It is an issue, but it's not a huge issue in my view.
I think if it's okay, just one incremental thought, and totally agree with. I mean, we have a great track record as an industry of handling this. I think the burden on private industry, and obviously I drink my own Kool-Aid a little bit. I think there are technologies that might help us get more out of it, and I think that's the question of, are you? Yes, we're good staying with the status quo because we know what we can do and we can do it safely. But I think there's a lot of smart people around this room who would agree we can get more out of it, and there's a lot to achieve if we do get it out of it efficiently, meaning either accelerate the remediation, have a complete recycling of it for certain technologies. And that's where I come back to, again, public-private makes a ton of sense, but it's got to start with the regulation. There's got to be, the mothership has to be able to say, it's okay if you take that risk. Don't be afraid to take that risk. That's where our country has drifted a little bit, is that we're just happy not making a mistake. That's not what made this country great.
Since we're offering personal opinions, I'll do one too. And this is not Western Governor's policy, but to me, when I was working on this stuff, it always seemed really stupid that we were not recycling, that we were just throwing away 90+% of what was left over. So that maybe has implications for what a final resting place for his stuff. Maybe that gets a lot easier to because you don't have as much thermal loading in there. And that becomes an easier, less expensive thing to take care of at the back end. So I would love to talk about that a lot more. I think it is important to give folks the assurance that we have a plan, and right now we just don't. And that's where I'm coming from. And again, that was personal, not Western Governor's policy.
You're fired. No, just kidding. So a couple of things that I've learned over the last couple of days. I'm not one of the smart people in the room. I'm trying here learning. So right now, the federal government spends about $800 million, or is it billion? 800 million, I believe, to the local utilities to basically store their used nuclear waste at their facilities. I was talking to the CEO of Oklo yesterday, and he said that the used nuclear waste, including the naval waste that's at INL, is equivalent to 1.2 trillion barrels of oil. So the question is, do you see companies really, an industry forming, especially with the EOs being signed by President Trump, that will unleash this industry? And secondly, with the EOs, Mary, do you believe that there's going to be a lot more permissiveness in terms of finding new uranium mines, opening up more? And do we actually have uranium mines, other places where we have a lot of uranium in this country that you think have not been yet tapped? So those two questions.
Sure. Yeah. I was going to respond to the mining and the recycling the used fuel. I hope so. I hope we start to use that fuel. I agree with you. We have all this used fuel that has a lot of energy still left in it. You know, from our perspective as a uranium miner, you see all these projections about growth and nuclear and all that. It's going to take a lot of uranium. I'm not sure where all that uranium is going to come from, quite frankly. You know, you have mines that have been operating for the last, many years. They're depleting. You know, that's just how mining works. You use it, you deplete it. You don't have another Kazakhstan popping up out of the ground, right? You have some big mines in Canada. You have Cigar Lake, that's owned by Cameco, big high grade, low cost uranium mine, but that has a finite life. There's a couple of projects behind it that could replace it. I think it's going to take kind of all of the above, both recycling and new mining. And when it comes to mining, as with anything, it's economics. I mean, uranium is extremely common in the Earth's crust. It's as common as tin, right? I'll pretty much guarantee anyone, if you go out in your backyard, pick up a handful of dirt, it's got some uranium molecules in it. It's in our human body, right? But that doesn't mean it's economic to recover it. We could recover uranium out of seawater if the price was high enough. And so a lot of it boils down to economics, and also let's recycle. Let's use stuff that's already been mined and manufactured. So the U.S. does have good uranium deposits, and certainly we need a healthy domestic industry for military and defense. For naval propulsion and all that. That material has to be mined, converted, enriched, and fabricated here in the United States for that purpose. So you need at least some semblance of a domestic uranium mining industry, and we can certainly fulfill that role.
I would maybe in response to your question, one of the executive orders is entitled Revitalizing the Industrial Base. And so that is actually quite focused on the fuel cycle and on strengthening and expanding sort of all aspects of the nuclear fuel cycle. I will say, as was said earlier, that one of the really critical prerequisites for sort of building out the fuel cycle, and it applies mining, conversion, enrichment, and with the new advanced fuels deconversion, is the Russian uranium ban, which really for so long Russian supply had, while it had been limited under something called the Russian Suspension Agreement, which was entered into in the early 1990s and was, I think, one of the longest standing suspension agreements ever entered into by the U.S. There was a limitations on how much material could come into the U.S., but it really did serve to kind of hold back the build out expansion of facilities here in the U.S. And so one of the executive orders is very much focused on trying to support expansion across the fuel cycle. And I think the Department of Energy is working to help to support expansion of the fuel cycle through a number of procurements that are pending. And they're a very important part of it, of course, and really maybe the most important part of it is that you will get an expanded fuel cycle when you have commercial contracts that underpin those investments. So these are all very, very capital intensive investments, and it's very important to know that those investments are not going to be stranded in the future, and that's why the uranium ban is so important. So it gives some certainty to suppliers and to the market. So really, the development of commercial contracts to support the build out of the fuel supply is very important, and that is happening. And so I think we will see expansion of the fuel cycle, and clearly there's a very, very strong support across the government agencies that are engaged on fuel cycle issues, from the Department of Energy to Commerce to State Department. I will say one other kind of federal policy that I do think is important, and it's come up a little bit earlier today and even yesterday, is the federal engagement with allied countries as well. And I know that's something that has been very important to the fuel cycle, in particular a couple of years ago, as there was an effort to transition away from reliance on Russia. As part of the G7 meetings, there was something called the Sapporo 5, which included the United States, the United Kingdom, Canada, France, and Japan, and they have been working together to collaborate on strengthening the fuel cycle across Western countries, and DOE's played a very large role in that. I think, as was mentioned earlier, just last week, there was an announcement of a technology partnership between the U.S. and the UK. At the center of that is civil nuclear energy. And so those partnerships are going to continue to be important. And I know that they exist at the state level too. I think Utah has an agreement with the United Kingdom, and so all of that is important because it does continue to be a global marketplace for the supply of some key components and things like that.
Let me just, if you don't mind, jump in on the recycling piece. So setting the stage, I mean, we don't recycle in this country because it's not economic to recycle in this country. And that's because the uranium prices are relatively cheap compared to what it would cost to recover that uranium or a different transuranic and put that into the fuel cycle. And it's not just the reprocessing facility itself, but it's the impacts of using the material that's recycled in the whole fuel cycle. So you have a different fuel fabrication requirements when you take recovered material, reprocessed material, versus when you have virgin uranium from the ground. So there's other challenges along the way, and historically this is all driven by economics. It's not really a technology perspective. I mean, again, there was at one point, 50 years ago, a ban for about 18 months on recycling, but if you look at why we haven't done that now, it's an economic thing. And so as we start looking at new advanced reactors that have different fuels and different fuel needs, I think there's a real excitement about recycling the material with these other sort of fuel cycles. So our light water reactors, while it'd be great if we could recycle some of that material, economically it hasn't made a lot of sense. But as we start looking at advanced reactors, high temperature reactors, molten salt reactors, all these other reactors out there that could potentially use some of the fuel as input, as fuel, as new fuel, I think there's a lot of excitement there. So I want to frame it that recycling was not done for economic reasons historically with our light water fleet, and we have an opportunity to sort of change that. And maybe one other point out, since you brought up the Sapora 5 and some of the investments the department is making on the front end of the fuel cycle, I do think that Congress has appropriated here domestically over $3.5 billion looking at enrichment and conversion. That those funds have not been sort of provided yet to industry. I hope that happens very soon. And when that does, I really hope that can really establish the demand signal for those investments that some of these companies are looking for. So I just want to bring that up as well.
Thank you very much. Richard McPherson. I spent 4 years at the International Atomic Energy Agency on a special six-nation group set up to study nuclear fuel cycle facilities. I'd been to almost every one in the world. At the time, my last paper that I wrote there, I said that we are 4 decades behind in the United States with producing electricity from uranium, and we have big uranium problems. Today, we're 7 decades behind in producing electricity from uranium, and we're much further behind. Thank you for everything you guys are doing.
Thanks. It's a great conversation. We've had a lot of discussion of how this is a remarkable bipartisan moment right now in support of nuclear. And I'm curious your thoughts on, this is a bit of a follow-up on one of Curtis's points about the potential future need for more uranium mining. So set aside maybe the possibility of the recycling obviates that to some degree, but assuming that we will still need more out of the ground. Curtis and I were talking yesterday about Coles Hill, Virginia. We both have kind of a relationship and a history there. And there's still a moratorium in Virginia for this massive deposit. And I'm curious, as the politics of nuclear writ large have changed, are you seeing the politics about uranium mining change at all? It doesn't necessarily follow, I don't think, that because everybody supports nuclear, and now everybody supports uranium mining.
And I hope that they're changing, but I'm curious your observation on that. A lot of these seem to be very parochial. Well, I like nuclear. We need more of it, but I don't want you to go into my backyard in a way that, in Virginia, the concern was that it would impact Virginia Beach's water quality, right? And there are probably similar concerns around other parts of the country where uranium mining is certainly a possibility in theory. And I'm so curious if you're seeing that change at all, or you're having those conversations with people that are saying we can do it safely now, and is the public perception shifting?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I mean, it's one of those things, almost in any industry, people want the results of all this wonderful technology, but they don't want, I don't know, the icky stuff you have to do to get there, right? The mining, the processing, the mineral processing, and all the manufacturing, right? When it comes to uranium mining, and again, you mentioned Coles Hill. That is actually, believe it or not, the largest uranium deposit in the United States is in Virginia. It's not in the Western United States. It's something like 200 million pounds of U-308 in the ground. It would supply the U.S. nuclear industry for 4 or 5 years just by itself. But people have, I'd say, a concern about uranium mining, like they would almost with any mining. There is sort of this long history of uranium mining in the United States, particularly in the Southwest United States, during the Cold War, when essentially the uranium industry was a government-sponsored weapons program. The U.S. government needed uranium for nuclear weapons to counter the Soviet Union. They were the only buyer of uranium, and so they essentially incentivized miners to go out with a pickup truck and a Geiger counter to try to find uranium you could go sell to the government. And there was a lot of mess that was left behind, particularly impacted tribal nations, honestly, like the Navajo Nation and others. And they're dealing with those issues even today. And again, that was in the 1940s, 50s, 60s. It was a long time ago, but it impacts our industry today, and memories are long. If you go down, particularly on Navajo Nation, you'll talk to people where, oh, my uncle, my grandfather worked in a uranium mine and he died, or I live out here and there's a uranium mine over there and it's continuing to pollute my groundwater, right? There are big issues that we have to overcome. And so, we're just a small company. We're certainly doing our part to try to change those perceptions. We actually signed an agreement with the Navajo Nation recently, which was honestly maybe one of the prouder moments of my career, to tell you the truth. To help them with the cleanup of some of those old legacy mines that we had nothing to do with, but also to try to just build this trust and to show not just them, but everybody in the public that uranium mining, just like any mining, can be done properly. It can be. We do it to the highest standards here in the United States. And if you stop it here, all you're going to do is push it overseas to places where they don't do it as well as we do here in the United States. And our White Mesa Mill down in southeast Utah is the most heavily regulated, safest, most protective uranium processing facility in the world. I can say that with confidence. We've seen these facilities all over the world, and it is the best. And we still see opposition to mining. When it comes to deposits, we can't help where the uranium is, right? We didn't put it there, but that is the most economic, you have to go after the most economic, cost-effective deposits. Like it or not, some of America's best uranium deposits are near the Grand Canyon. I personally wish they weren't there just because of the public perception and all that, but these are little tiny mines that are very, very high grade. They're very cost effective to produce, totally protective of the environment and groundwater and all that stuff. But again, like the Grand Canyon, it's a national, it's a landmark. I love it almost more than anything in the world. If I thought we were going to harm the Grand Canyon, I couldn't work for this company. But again, it's a process. I would love to see state and federal governments take a more active role in promoting the safety and the regulation and the features of modern uranium mining, and how it can be done properly. Again, we're just one little company. We do what we can, but we need more.
Do we have time for one more? Okay.
Thank you. As a novice to the nuclear fuel cycle, my question might be juvenile, but you were talking about you being just one little company. I wonder if you could speak to some of the barriers to entrance in the mining industry for specifically uranium production, and in the broader fuel cycle in general. What are the biggest barriers?
Yeah, and I won't speak too much to this. I'll let some of the other panelists speak on this as well. I would say that the days of the mom and pop uranium mining company are over. If you go back to the Cold War days, it was. You could literally just be a guy and a couple of crew, and you could go open up a uranium mine on federal land or on private land and start selling to the government. The barriers to entry, I mean, it is regulation, environmental, health, safety regulation. It takes a lot, and it should. I mean, I'm not up here to argue for reduced regulation. I'm really not. But it does create some barriers to entry. It is expensive to build a mill. Our White Mesa mill, it would probably cost $400 or $500 million just to replicate that. I don't know how long the permitting process, if it could be done at all, to permit a new uranium mill, but probably 10, 15 years or something like that. Elsewhere, and again, I don't think we're going to be, and I may shoot my colleagues in the industry might shoot me for this, but I don't think we're going to be energy independent when it comes to uranium in the United States. We probably can, but I just am not sure there's the public and political will to do that. But I'm okay if we import from Canada and Australia and some of these other allied countries. I have a big problem with importing from Russia and China and Kazakhstan and those kinds of places. But if you can raise some money and there is funding to go into mining companies to open mines, and if you have a good economic deposit, you can certainly get into this industry.
Just from more from the enrichment perspective, as was said, it is very capital intensive, and so we need. So that is a challenge. There are also sort of other aspects of operating an enrichment facility that are very important. It was mentioned earlier, the workforce, the training, the quality assurance, all of the aspects of operating a facility are very complex, and they do require a very well-established, quality assurance program and other programs that will help to ensure that the plant is operated as it is appropriately. And there are also safeguard security issues that have to be addressed as well. So the operation of some of these facilities is it's heavily regulated. It does require licensing. It is important to be able to work with the states. Our own facility, we have the NRC licensing, which is very important. But in addition, as we expand, there are state level permitting requirements, construction permits, water permits, all of that. So it really does require sort of at all levels, regulators working together to help to support the development of these facilities. And so that's why it's so important that where they're developed, there is strong state support.
All right, please join me in thanking our panelists for this panel. All right, thank you so much, Chris, Mary, Josh, Curtis. We're going to take a short little break here so we can get our next panel set up.
Oh, okay.
stuff.
We are going to start our next panel now, so please go ahead and get seated. Okay, please go ahead and get seated so we can get started with our next session. We're going to kick off this panel here right now. Talk loud.
Okay, everyone. As we've heard very often through the course of this workshop, the future of nuclear depends on having the right people in the right places as much as having the technology. This panel will explore how to overcome workforce challenges through targeted development, innovative training programs, and employer capacity development. I'll turn it over to Jimmy.
Thank you, Sarah. Good afternoon, or good morning still, right? My name is Jimmy McDonough. I am the Assistant Commissioner with the Utah System of Higher Education for Higher Education Workforce Programs, an office called Talent Ready Utah. We were created actually by Governor Cox in 2014 with the Boeing company coming to the state and really wanting pathway programs to funnel students and higher ed graduates into workforce. And so this is a great connection with nuclear because this truly is what, as an agency, we were built for and our purpose. We work in our system with 16 higher education institutions, 8 degree granting institutions, 8 technical colleges, and 1 community college in there as well. But we also work with the public education system as well in developing pathway programs and getting students into those pathways. I'd love to let my panel, which is amazing, to just give a brief introduction to your name and where you're representing.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Jimmy. I'm Bethany Coates. I'm the CEO of Breakline Education. Delighted to be here. Thank you to Governor Cox and team, to the INL team. Jimmy, thank you for the invitation, and to the WGA staff as well. Delighted to be here. Breakline focuses on something that we call education for employment. So we're very focused on enabling Americans to transition into new opportunities in new sectors as quickly and efficiently as possible. We were founded about 10 years ago, and in that time have focused primarily on our military community. So huge amounts of work and thousands of outcomes for our veterans and military spouses. And we spent a lot of time on tech, defense tech, and now we're branching into nuclear. So delighted to be here. Happy to share more about our work, but most importantly, to share some thoughts around how we can help solve some of these acute workforce challenges within the advanced nuclear sector.
Sure.
Well, good morning, everybody. Good morning, everybody. Thank you. My name is Michelle Fussell. My title is Legislative Representative with the Iron Workers International. What I actually do is I am the State and Local Director of Government Relations. So I have the honor of working with governors, attorney generals, and state reps across the United States to work on policy to help get our members to work. I represent over 130,000 members in the United States. About 35,000 of those live in the Western states, and a quarter of those are all apprentices. So I'm excited to talk to you all today about our apprenticeship programs and how we can scale up and help you with the skilled workforce that you need.
Hello, everybody. Can you guys hear me? Here we go. Chris Hader with High Tech Solutions. I'm one of the co-founders, and our position started off strictly as manpower with a shop of about 30 folks. And we have scaled up to grow quite a bit. And right now we're at 30 sites across the world right now, including the UK and Brazil, providing workforce all the way from project management, leadership, engineering support, just about everything you could think of that it takes to complete a nuclear project. So we've been around since 2003. I've been a part of the company, as we call it, a co-founding. We reincorporated in 2013 to kind of expand our scope from very specifically an Energy Northwest Columbia partner at the reactor not too far from here in Washington State. So we've been doing that since 2013, and we've been expanding across the world.
Awesome. Chris, my first question is for you. We had a great opportunity with High Tech to visit most of our degree granting institutions in Utah together. And one of the things that I thought that you shared and your team shared during those meetings was the workforce need, and you kind of broke it down in 4 phases. Can you kind of share that? Because it was really insightful for us as we plan for a nuclear workforce.
Yeah, it's a lot more of it's a broad issue we face. As we've broken it down into 4, and you could take it down even further into subcategories of these 4, you have your regulatory licensing, right? We have to get sites ready for this. We have our, forgive me, then we have to figure out like construction, right? Which is going to be a lot of folks from unions, skilled trade, skilled craft, which requires a little more attention, as we saw in South Carolina and Georgia, where we had varying degrees of success getting those reactors online, followed by you have your maintenance, your service groups. And so you have to start building out these types of workforces to support the fleets that we hope to expand and build on. And then last but not least, obviously there's an operational standpoint. So the utility itself. And I don't like to speak on behalf of the utilities, but I speak to the utilities daily. And our current reactors don't have enough operations support, don't have enough maintenance support. So we're already at deficit with our 90+ reactors operating today. And so when you look at all of these other areas from phase 1 through, call it these different phases, we're short everywhere. And regulatory and licensing doesn't grow on trees. That takes a lifetime of experience and career. So what we're finding is, in this great capitalist society we live in, is that the resources are being stretched between all sorts of new entities and companies. And so we're facing some pretty unique challenges, and we have to hit the accelerate button.
You know, Bethany, you guys do awesome with really developing high needed talent. And in Utah, where we have low unemployment, we have to tap into every single resource. We can't let any stone be unturned as we're looking for talent and developing talent and getting talent into our workforce. Can you talk a little bit about the ways in the programs that you have that are kind of getting our talent into that pipeline, and you're developing that workforce for us?
Oh, yeah. Of course, you bet. And I would just build on Chris's comments and, say out loud what everybody in this room knows to be true, which is the talent deficit is not just at the plant level. It's not just at the reactor level. It's also at the corporate level. I mean, these are complex businesses with tons and tons of different needs for professional salaried employees, and there is a deficit everywhere. And so I think it is really critical for us to start thinking about exactly how we're going to bridge those deltas today before it gets even worse. And one of the ways in which Breakline does that is by attracting talent from adjacent areas.
and adjacent sectors. And for nuclear, we should be thinking very much about our military as an adjacent sector. It is the premier nuclear workforce in the country and in the world. And Brakeline has been working with this workforce for about 10 years. So we have about 25,000 people in our community, highly, highly curated, highly trained, and very ready and willing to jump into nuclear. There's never really been an opportunity before, right? Like it's always been flying under the radar for the last couple of decades. This is our first moment to break out with this population of folks, and they're knocking at the door. So that's the very good news. When we think about how can we be the best possible partner to industry, we actually don't have to boil the ocean. We don't have to overcomplicate this. There are 5 metrics that matter. And when we think about and when we design our programs, we design around those metrics because that is what industry needs from us. The first one is time to fill. You've heard from every single panel here from yesterday through today saying workforce is the existential crisis issue for this industry. So time to fill matters. General Matter, Drew is here. We heard from Drew and Terry, Standard Nuclear, TerraPower, Nano Nuclear. They all right now have somewhere around 40 roles open. So it's actually at a manageable size today, but it's crucial for these small growing companies to fill these roles as quickly as possible. So time to fill. There are only 4 other metrics that matter. Attrition. So by the end of the first year, how many folks have I lost? That's the mishire rate. Retention, are the people I hire staying and how long are they staying for? Performance, are they getting promoted? And then scalability. And one way to think about this is, what is my cost per hire? Hiring from an industry perspective is extraordinarily time consuming. It has a really high failure rate. It is one of the most vexing challenges for leaders today. So the cost per hire and the scalability are crucial. With the work that we've done in Utah, our cost per hire is $4,000 in a pilot year, and our time to hire is between 6 to 12 weeks. So that outperforms any workforce development initiative that I'm aware of, and that's in a pilot year. That's something that we should be able to reduce further over time as we scale. But if we design programs around exactly what the industry needs and is asking for, we can do it really efficiently, and we can use those taxpayer dollars in such a way that enables us to get a financial return within about a year or so in terms of bringing job seekers into the workforce now as taxpayers.
Thank you. Michelle, from a labor perspective, can you kind of talk to us about what are those barriers and how are you addressing those barriers to upskill your labor workforce?
Well, obviously there are barriers coming into this industry. One of them is certification and licensure. One of the great things about our programs is that it's really not about the barrier of the workforce. It's about the predictability. We need to have some sort of timeline in order to provide these workers to you. We provide all of the training. An iron worker is an iron worker, whether they're building a high rise, they're maintaining an oil and gas facility, or they're coming to work on a nuclear plant. The difference is the certifications that are required on the nuclear facility, which we will provide. We just need to know it in advance. So it's not so much about our availability. We can upscale. We have to have predictability in order to be able to meet the standard. Right here in Idaho, we have a facility just 50 miles down the road that helps staff workers here in this facility and throughout the region. In Khmer, Wyoming, we had to upscale that out of Salt Lake City because we did not have the facilities there, but we were told in advance by the developer what their needs were going to be and how many hundreds of workers they were going to need. And so we trained those workers in Salt Lake and moved them into Wyoming. We're doing the same thing right now in North Dakota, being able to get ready to do mining and different operations there. So it's really about the predictability of the market and the stability of it for us to be able to provide workers.
Awesome. Chris, you're going to say something?
Yeah, very quickly. So nuclear power is a unique industry. Where you have both union and non-union working so closely. For example, at Columbia Station, we actually work under the ILWU for what would be considered the high-risk portions of the projects. We also have our own, I actually have a union shop out of South Carolina. And so when we look at these problems and we talk about return on investment and these other things, when I take somebody off the streets, so to speak, right, non-nuclear. It takes us about 3 years to put them through enough qualification certification and get them enough time in field. So we're actually tackling an entirely new animal when we look at this, and we talk about maybe a year being a possibility for return on investment. So it's a little bit different from other industrial settings and workforces, as you have such a unique blend from degreed to skilled trade to maybe specifically we talked about quality earlier. You don't necessarily need a degree, but you do need a lot of experience to be a quality assurance or quality control individual in nuclear power. You're talking more like 5 to 10 years minimum experience to do that. So we're already behind. So we talk about deficits. So we have to be creative in how we attack these problems. But I think both of these responses are actually wonderful.
So kind of for Michelle and you, Chris, one of the things I know that we've talked about a lot in Utah is that depending on the company that's coming in and is building, there's going to be collaborative effort with unions. And so what does that look like, or what are some models that you've seen in building that relationship, building that partnership, maybe in states that don't have a huge union presence currently?
Well, I mean, I'll answer really quick firstly. Our membership is highly portable. We prefer local hire, though. We prefer to have people from the community working on the projects that are in the community, which is why we're committed to a training program. We have a standardized training program across the United States. It is a 4-year program with classroom time and on-the-job training. There is no cost to the apprentice that's in the program. There is no cost to the taxpayer or the state or federal government. It is fully funded by the union and our Joint Management Cooperation Trust. So that means that our employers also sit on these boards and they determine the training that our members are going to receive. The other important thing to note is that our members are our members, but when they are dispatched out, they become the employee of the contractor. And so the contractor or developer calls us and tells us how many people they need, what certifications, what's licensure, what training they need, and we send them. If somebody doesn't work out, they send them back. We send them to someone else. If they need 200 people, we scale up to it. We had, like I said, in Wyoming, where we had that incident in Kansas, we had to scale up to 300 hiring workers on the Panasonic plant overnight, practically, and we did it. Some of it is by portability, and some of it is by going in and heavily recruiting into the community. Most of it is portability and then recruitment so that we can place local hires. So those are things that we use to do that. And again, our training is standardized. So the member that gets dispatched here in Idaho has the same exact training as a member who's working at TVA in Tennessee or Georgia. So those are the same members that are working at Chris's plant there in South Carolina. So same training, same standards. And if you tell us you need something more in your certifications, we'll add it.
Stead? So Chris, one of the things when we visited the institutions, we really took a look at what were your high demand positions that you have as an organization. And then we looked at each of the institutions, be it the technical colleges, all the way around, and we kind of mapped, where is that training and kind of what are your needs and like what are those gaps. We talked, because of experience is huge. We talked about co-ops, internships, and kind of those partnerships. Can you kind of talk about what does that collaborative effort look like between industry and training providers to make this successful?
First and foremost, what it looks like is hard work and actually boots on ground discussions. We have been to all but one major university in Utah. Clearly, we are currently out of Washington State, so we work closely with those universities. And now it's about getting out to the Mountain West and the West Coast in general. So we look at this problem we face there's a really good question actually asked earlier about what about the West, right? Where's our manufacturing supply chain? Where's our fuel sources? Where's our, right? Well, fuel we actually do have in Eastern Washington, but where is the West in all of this? Because clearly the East and the South have far outweighed us. So when we come back to these problems that we face, in delivering the workforce in partnership with, whether it's a trade school, whether it's a university, a junior college, or a four-year university, we have to get there. We have to be able to work with them and explain a very foreign entity, which is nuclear power. Commercial nuclear power, especially here in this Mountain West region, is that there really isn't anything for us to point out and say this is what is good, right? And so what we do have, though, is we have companies who are willing to say, well, what do we, or in universities and other groups, and the state, and Governor Cox himself leading out with Operation Gigawatt, is that how do we actually solve this problem? And this is everybody has to participate type of problem. But from the commercial side, we're more than willing to decentralize, for example, our announced training facility. The idea of a training facility is what it started as, and now we're far more focused on more of what we'd call a campus, bringing adjacent industry, bringing in unique partners. We have a very unique partnership with the Department of Defense, for example, probably similar to what Brake Lane's doing. And so we have been piloting that program now for a year, and we brought in our first 4 folks through what's called Skill Bridge, and it's been very effective. No question, our return on investment will probably be shorter. But when we go from university, let's take Snow College, for example, I need to be able to see what Snow College is capable of. I can't just assume because they're a university that they'll be good at what they do. And as my team of experts, both union and non-union, walked their facilities, they were shocked at what a great university that is and what great equipment they have. All they need is a curriculum of what commercial nuclear power or DOE nuclear power requires.
Some, and I think one of the things to add to that, I think it was really great, as we toured all those facilities, also looking at ways that as an industry, you could support them, of sending your experts out to, show what welding would look like different, in these different realms. Again, because we don't necessarily have all of the resources and the expertise. Also want to add, in Utah, one of the things, this is a multi-layer approach. We work with the Office of Energy Development in creating their curriculum for high schools, looking at our CTE pathways, as we're looking at, we want every high school senior to have either a workforce readiness credential or a college readiness credential. And so looking at what are those certifications that also align with industry as well. Bethany, I want to talk to you a little bit more about, as we kind of look at what are those adjacent industries, as we look at upskilling that we can tap into or that we can develop and reskill with.
You bet, Jimmy. And so the way that I think about workforce development for nuclear, in my mind, it has 2 phases to it. The first one is immediate needs and addressing immediate needs as quickly as possible, because if we can't do that, we're not going to get to that hockey stick growth that everybody in this room wants to see. And so immediate needs, from my perspective, has to include attracting talent from adjacent spaces. And so the most obvious ones, in addition to the military, I will be poaching all day long from defense tech and defense primes. I will be poaching all day long from the broader energy sector. I will be poaching all day long from aerospace. All of these spaces have really, really fabulous talent for the sector. However, electric vehicles, Tesla and Rivian are bleeding talent right now. We should be all over those companies. And robotics is a really fertile hunting ground for nuclear. And then main companies as well. Main companies are actually, from a talent perspective, under stress. And so we can effectively poach talent from those spaces too. And this has got to be part of the solution, because speed is so important here. And so, yes, we have to also have a phase 2, which is continuing to invest in a longer tail of ground up building of this talent. But we don't get there until we fulfill the immediate needs first.
Michelle, kind of transitioning to.
Can I have that one industry that was forgotten? You know what my favorite employee is? Farm boy, high school education, farm gal, somebody who knows hard work. Our industry doesn't require a degree for everything we do. I will tell you, people with work ethic, easily found in rural America. If you want to know who's operating our power plants today, it's those people. It's it's the blue collar, it's those individuals who grow up knowing how to take apart a diesel engine, put it back together. But may because of circumstance, choice, whatever it may be, didn't decide to go the 4-year or 2-year degree route. So I can tell you 60+% of my workforce are people from rural America. And as we continue to look for the best talent across every, turn over every stone, that's one area I want to make sure we don't forget. And as we go through the Mountain West, this is what the Mountain West is comprised of. Yes, we have wonderful academic institutions from all 3 of these great states, Wyoming, Utah, and Idaho. But we cannot forget who's going to build these things. And if we go over into the ranks of the iron workers and the unions, that's what you're going to find is hardworking Americans brought up through amazing trade programs.
Yeah, agreed. And I'd add to that too, and Bethany hit on it. We have an amazing military program as well. We also have an amazing female recruitment program as well now. Women are actually amazing iron workers. They kick ass. They are really great at it, and we've really focused on it. We've done a lot with pre-apprenticeship programs and pre-training to make sure we can get people placed. But Chris is correct. Where are these projects happening too, by the way? They're in rural areas. And so we're not just sticking to the cities. We have to be out looking for the farm boys and the veterans who've just come back. The average age of an apprentice now is 28 years old, used to be 19. So this is not a first career choice for people, it's a second. And there's nothing wrong with that. And that's what we're looking for.
Yeah. One of the things that we struggle with as we look at this new workforce is in some areas, like in Utah, the opportunities don't currently exist. And so it's kind of hard to train or prepare or develop and not have something for them, as we're talking to college graduates or, we're developing that. And so can you talk a little bit more? Because I know there's, from all of you, there are pieces there, so I don't want to give that away. I want you to answer it. What can we do, or how do we provide those opportunities and keep people engaged as we get them trained and up to speed?
Well, I mean, what's critical for us is actually having a job to put them on. That is correct. We can put them in a classroom for 1 to 4 weeks every year. But if they don't get their hours in the field, they're not getting that on the job training. So that's part of the reason why we have a portable workforce. Yes, we're going to move them around as needed. In Salt Lake, we have lots of jobs right now on the airport. We have a lot going on in Park City that requires travel. Again, we have almost 200 members up in Wyoming. So these are things that make our workforce portable, but also puts the people in place to train those local people, so that the people in Wyoming can come back to Utah, and Wyoming is now working on those jobs. That is the goal. That is what we want to do. So yes, that comes back to my predictability. We do need predictability. I have the availability. I need the predictability in the jobs.
So anything?
Yes, absolutely. So I think this is a little bit of a chicken and the egg situation that we're in, because I actually believe that if we can show as a tri-state area that we have the workforce available, we can get the industry to come here and the jobs will come here. A really great example, a very obvious example of that is California with the tech industry. But a really scrappy example, a state that is hustling hard, is Ohio. And they just announced a program where they are providing employers with a $15,000 stipend for every STEM employee that they have relocate from out of state into the state of Ohio. So there are lots and lots of great examples out there about how we can currently leverage the workforce that exists in our states, but also draw talent that we need to fill roles that we don't have the adequate pipeline for. And I think that if we can do that, we can relocate the industry here, which I think should be our goal. We want advanced nuclear to be headquartered across these 3 states. Showing that we have the workforce is going to be a crucial step in enabling those companies to have the security that they need to make that happen.
Well, that's a touchy subject for me. My oldest moved to Columbus, Ohio 2 years ago because she got a stipend of $15,000 from the Honda battery plant. And she has not been at home. So Governor, can you please bring her home?
Yeah.
So my challenges are a little bit different, maybe similar to Union in some way, is that I have 30 plus utilities that we'll be working with this fall. The workforce has been delivering the new fuel for the past few months, putting the fuel in the fuel vaults or in the spent fuel pool to go into outage. We're doing this across the world, or we're storing fuel. Eastern Washington, Columbia Station will be storing the spent fuel with our partners at Holtec. We're going to be doing that. We've been doing that in Brazil for the past 2 years. We're another year left in Brazil. We're doing this in the UK right now. We're actually storing fuel, welding the canisters, doing all these things. So I have a problem. I can't find enough good people that I can put through the appropriate training programs, which is why a part of it is that my training facility currently in Pennsylvania is tiny, and I can only put through certain certifications currently as we've been finishing off our quality program. Now that our quality program's done, NQA1, Appendix B, everything we needed to do that, we can now certify our own training. We don't need a partner to do that any longer. Part of coming to Utah and relocating my company to Utah was to have a greenfield state, a state with the appropriate legislative leadership, great initiatives like Talent Ready, where Jimmy and you and Vic are working to build something quite amazing. And that all comes back down to leadership of the state. And so when you have the right people, you know, we are leaving Washington for a reason, because there is somewhere better. And so I'm short in one contract, 84 individuals as of this morning on my staffing call with my staffing team. It's 84 people that some other company is going to fill, frankly, with lesser quality. Because when you work for my company, you are the best. And that's plain and simple. So therefore, I'm willing to not take people on just to fill a role. So this is why I want to be in the Mountain West. This is why I want good people who care and want to have a lifetime position, who want to work for one company for 40 years and then call it a day, a company that'll take care of them. These things kind of have fallen by the wayside in America. You go to a tech company and you hop 7 tech companies and you hope you get one of the big ones and get your company IPOs and you get lucky, right? It's like we're rolling the dice. But no, when we talk about workforce development, it's just another word for being in the business of people. And I care about those who work for me. In fact, next year, we're going to be announcing our employee stock ownership program to deliver to our people that as we succeed, that they succeed with us, that all boats in the harbors rise, from my brand new technicians who have varying degrees of skill sets and experience to the people who've been with me for 25 years now, from the beginning of the company. So workforce development isn't just providing that we need the jobs. It's actually having companies who are worthy of their efforts and unions that are worthy of their efforts. And so as we're talking about this, we need to remember that we're talking about our neighbors, our children, and our children's children. We are at deficit, so therefore we need to stop the bleeding now so that we can fix it for future generations. And that's what we're trying to accomplish with this. So I need people yesterday. Last fall, I was 300 people short. This fall, I'm 84. It's a little slower this fall. Next spring, I can tell you right now, I could take 600 more people if I had the right people and the right participation. But they have to be that. They have to be the right people. So, and I think here with Governor Cox and Governor Little and all of those who are participating in this, we are on that trajectory. We don't need to wait. This isn't on my end. It's not it's not chicken and egg. We already we're short. Yeah. So you add 50 more reactors. My goal, so you know, Governor Cox, is 20 reactors in Utah and at least half that in each Wyoming and Idaho. That's my goal, and that's Holtec's goal. And so we need a lot of jobs. And so we better darn well create the facilities and work together and stop working against one another.
As we kind of, and it's probably going to be our last question, that way we can have some time for audience questions. You know, we've talked about the age of apprentices kind of going up. You kind of talked about that workforce that you need currently. How do we make nuclear more attractive to the younger generation? How do we attract them in high school and kind of make this, for lack of a better word, sexy again? You know, how do we make them want to come into this industry and consider opportunities here?
I think you're talking about the new version of Governor Cox's shorts.
Yeah.
So I think that there's a broader topic here, which has been touched on before, which is that the American public at large is not tracking nuclear yet. And we're all excited about it, but it's kind of been mothballed in the mind of the average American for so many years that one of the most important things that we can do to start attracting that interest is a very aggressive, very proactive storytelling campaign. And we ended up doing a ton of focus groups and research within our nuclear trained community. And I was very surprised by what they told us, the reasons why they wouldn't pursue careers in nuclear. And I think it's helpful for this room to be aware, even for that community, the veterans had reservations that I think the American public is likely to share at the outset that we need to speak to. The first one for these vets is, I've already done it before. There's nothing more for me to learn. And I know that Drew DeWalt would take issue with that. Like going from the Navy into general matter would be a very, very different and really interesting career path. We have to tell that story. There's a whole issue around mission that I think is one of this industry's most compelling advantages. Whether it's environmentalism, whether it's national security, whether it's the business model, whether it's the tech, there is a mission-driven element here that will speak to the type of prospective employee that the industry needs and is looking for. But we have to tell them that story. We have to light that fire, to your point, Jimmy. There's a question around pacing. And somebody spoke to it earlier in the conference. Like, is this, for a high intensity individual, are they going to be able to hit their stride in this industry? And we have to be able to answer that question with a resounding yes. And then some questions around geography as well. But I thought I wanted to illuminate some of those reservations because I think that we should use them to construct a very compelling communication strategy around this industry. That's going to be the precursor to starting to develop more interest and get some of that, incoming interest back into the sector. But passing it along to my co-panelists as well.
Well, I mean, as you know, iron workers are focused on construction, but I will tell you this, a nuclear facility has a unique opportunity for our member. They don't want to jump around the country. They will, but they don't. And I will say, we work in all 4 phases of the construction, as you were talking about, site prep, construction, manufacturing, and O&M. If we can offer an iron worker a job that he's going to stay at for the rest of his life, or she, sorry, they love that. I have workers at Intel in Hillsboro, Oregon, who have spent their whole careers there and are about to retire. And we're still dispatching members out there. So a nuclear facility has a very unique opportunity and is appealing to a member because this member is going to have steady work for 25 years. He's going to build it. He's going to maintain it. And he's going to make sure everything is safe in and around it. And that is what we're going to provide.
There goes. So user error, I'm sure. I get it. I've been in nuclear power since 2007 by complete chance. And my first job was mopping floors at Columbia Station. And I met the gentleman from High Tech. And when I met them, I was just there to pay off school debt, right? That's all I wanted to do. And I had no connection to the plant. My father had married a wonderful woman who taught dance lessons to the engineers and the radiation protection folks at Columbia Station. And they have temporary positions for outages. And so I go there, by chance, they put me up on what's the elevation 606, which was the refuel floor of a boiling water reactor. And I met these really unique people from High Tech. And there was the big companies there. There's the institutional companies, the Westinghouses, the General Electrics, the Framatomes, the Holtecs. And I saw this little company who was having fun, who liked their jobs. Not saying the other groups don't, but that they were building something that I wanted to be a part of. And I was willing to remap my entire life and pitched to these gentlemen. I actually got right of first refusal to buy out one of the partners when I signed on with them. I said, I want to own this company someday because I think we can do better. Because I think we have allowed this to become such small pockets of the US. And everywhere you go, there's a nuclear power plant for the most part. Better roads, better schools, right? Better tax revenues, great institutions. I hire all of my engineers right from the backyard of Westinghouse, to be honest with you. And I, while I'm appreciative of these things, and I'm so grateful to work with these wonderful companies, we have right now how many startups in our industry? So it isn't just about education about nuclear power. This new generation, these 16 to 30-year-old folks, and even the older, they're looking for stability. They're looking for comfort. They want to know that they're going to work for an employer worthy of their efforts for their life. It's a big thing to ask of somebody. So I think it's less about nuclear power. Yes, we have education to do on what spent nuclear fuel really is. Really what spent nuclear fuel is, just for everybody, is a gold mine. And it's jobs all in itself. It's its own little economic ecosystem. But besides that, back to people, we have an opportunity to prove to people that we're worthy of their efforts. We're worthy of their careers, their children's careers, and so on. And so we need to have companies that treat them well. Startups they're exciting, they're fun, but we need companies who are hiring people in to deliver an atmosphere that they want to grow up in and they want to retire from. So as we go out and we start talking to these people, that's what we're really doing, is we're selling them on a story that you get to work for a great company that gets to change the world. We're in a renaissance if we allow it to be one, and they get to be a part of that. So when we're out there selling them, we can talk about fuel. Yes, we got to answer all of these questions directly, all the potential negatives or perceived negatives of our industry, but really you want to work for great American companies. That's what you want to work for. And you want that for your neighbors. And for me, the standard, do you know who my shareholder is? It's every single person in my company. And I think as we go forward and we do this, if we can paint that picture to the youth, it's already proven they're about lifestyle. They're less about the top dollar. And we build out an amazing opportunity for them to grow up in. And that's, again, I hate to say this, maybe we've kind of failed ourselves in our generations, but we certainly shouldn't fail the next generation. This is our time to deliver to them the America that they deserve. And so this industry gives us that, from the unions to the companies who are coming into this, because commercial nuclear power will chew you up and spit you out. It's a tough industry. The utilities are challenging and wonderful places to be, but they change from utility to utility. The standards change. And this is what we get to do, from the unions to all of the private industry, is we got to go rebuild what the new standard will be. And as we do that, that attracts people, because if our standards are high, people want to be a part of that.
As you can see, we could talk all day about this topic, and we have more questions, but not enough time. But I do want to give some time for questions from you. So some.
Matt McVicker, just going back to kind of the DoD as best-in-class model. So one of the things, and I love hearing the, yes, we want long-term workforces. So DIU within DoD has embraced through Gig Eagle, which is basically it's I think it's a classified program now, but what it was billed as originally was an ability to survey the entirety of the U.S. workforce and say, for a surge need, these are the skills that we could drop into factories or solicit. But it also leverages the gig economy, and you're kind of meeting the workers where they are at present. So I'm curious, across all of your organizations, how are you rostering the skills either within your state or within your different jurisdictions? How do we make sure there's some sort of list or an ability to track? And maybe that comes out of universities, but I just don't think we can rely on LinkedIn to get us there, especially given the type of workers we're seeking.
I'll start, and then I'll kind of hand it over. It's as Bethany was talking about, it's really hard because the workforce doesn't exist. So typically for us, we would go to our workforce services department and we'd say, hey, give us the data. But the data doesn't really exist yet in the state. And so that makes some things, a little bit challenging in that part. When we work with employers, we're talking to them about what are their needs, what are you seeing for these different phases? What would it take for your employment? What are your current demands? What are your needs? What are your position requirements? And what are those qualifications? So we're mapping all of that out by each of those employers that we're having those conversations. We're then going to our institutions to figure out how does that map with our certifications, with our degree requirements. And so we're kind of collecting and pulling all that data. But again, it makes it a little bit difficult because it's not an existing workforce. So we're kind of piecing that together to kind of, and then also looking at other states that have done it, to kind of get some data from what were their lessons learned, what were their needs or what they didn't have. And so we're kind of pulling it from different pieces from our strategy.
I will say, and this is going to be a little bit different, but we do have a robust program with the military called Almost to Hard Hats. We have that pipeline. We also work extensively with tribal nations. I worked with Representative Cole this last year in appropriations to make sure we had pre-apprenticeship funding back on tribal lands. So that's another pipeline that we are utilizing. And then one that will not affect the nuclear industry directly, but we work with a lot of DOCs in many states and run reentry programs. So we're able to take members that are coming back into the community, reentering, and put them into apprenticeship jobs. They will not be able to get TWIC cards, but we will be able to fill them in other positions and move our iron workers that are able to get security clearances and TWIC cards into these facilities. So we're using that as a pipeline as well. So that is that's a few of the ways that we're doing that. And I will say, and I know this kind of off topic, reentry programs are my favorite. We have an 80% reduction in recidivism, and being able to work those members back into our community and give them real careers and real jobs really makes a big difference. And then again, it frees our members up to come to facilities like this.
Okay, well, I can't give up my trade secrets. We've built our pipelines over 2 decades. But I will say this, it's plain and simple. There's a lot of hard work. There isn't a great automation for this right now. There isn't a LinkedIn that fixes this problem, to your point, it's well said. So it's boots on ground. Like I said, I would challenge every company in here, startup, commercial, whatever it is, if Utah or Idaho or Wyoming are on your radar, go talk to the universities and the trade schools. What you find is there's little pockets. The trade school, oh, hey, there's this program. I call him my son. He was a homeless kid from Ogden, Utah, actually from Idaho. His mom dropped him off in Ogden. He ended up coming and staying with me for a couple of years. And he got into a workforce development program that's not very well recognized to get him back on his feet. As he graduated high school with us, we needed somewhere for him to go, but his grades weren't quite there. And we ended up getting him into a program. It's I think it's in South Weber, and it had a welding group. And I went and met with these guys because I didn't know much about welding. And as it turns out, they were brilliant, and they have wonderful welding. So Keaton was able to go to that in his second year, and he's got several. He's talking to unions. He's talking to my company, of course. But you have to go and find the pockets, and so you have to do the work. And I wish that wasn't the case. We have an AI software we've been working on that's going to help us quantify some of these things, but it still doesn't take away from the fact you're just going to have to be boots on ground finding these pockets.
I would just add 2 comments to what's already been said. One is, the availability of talent during surges depends partially on the employer or the partner's ability to stay engaged with relevant populations all the way throughout, so that it's not a cold outreach. They're not learning about it for the very first time. This is something that they have sort of a low-lying level of awareness and knowledge about. And when the time is right, then you strike. And that's part of what makes the hiring process so efficient. A couple of ways that Breakline does that, we actually, Mike, we interviewed Raj Shah, who was one of the managing directors of DIU under Ash Carter years ago. He's responsible for a lot of the innovation that's happened out of that shop since then. But we do that as part of a podcast, and those conversations are live events that our entire community is invited to. It's that kind of cadence that keeps people engaged so that you can reach out when the time is right. However, there's also a really important component here for employers. Can you raise your hand if you have ever hired someone? Can you raise your hand if you would feel comfortable translating a veteran's resume? Like, would you be able to translate a veteran's resume? This is an articulation of what happens in our workforce, where hiring managers are primarily civilians who are not as comfortable interpreting the resumes and backgrounds of folks from really different types of work experiences. And so I think that there's also, there should be a low-level ongoing training and support for employers who want to find top talent wherever it exists, but it may take a little bit of extra effort when we don't already have the familiarity with all of the relevant populations.
We'll add one other thing. We have developed in Utah, it's called the Utah Talent Hub. We did a soft launch a couple of weeks ago, but should do a major launch October 2nd after our next board meeting. And so we've developed a system that we've built that will match students with employers, specifically looking at ONET skills and classifications and making direct matches based off of the skills students have and what the employer needs. But also with that system, we're also looking at connecting professors with industry for projects, connecting students with employers for internships, connecting students with students. So it's a kind of a multifaceted system that we've created that does a lot of matching behind the scenes. But really, we wanted to create a one-stop shop for this system for all of Utah. That way, one employer didn't have to go to all 16 institutions. They could go to one spot, and they would be able to make those connections both for student pipeline and for projects like that. So that would be another thing.
I have a question for Michelle on construction capacity. So in this surge demand, we saw a big push following the CHIPS Act on constructing all these fab facilities. Are you seeing those maturing now to where that the construction know-how can be transferred into this industry, or is that still at full throttle?
It's actually, that's a kind of a loaded question, to be honest with you. We started building the facilities. We entered phase 1 in Columbus, Ohio, and Intel. We have, we have the facility in Arizona running. Intel in Oregon is at full capacity, and the problem is they're starting to scale back now. So I don't anticipate seeing further phases on some of these projects. We have had 3 battery plants already being pulled off the shelf for this year, totaling about $12 billion in construction over 3 states. So there's room. I will tell you that right now. If we shifted a lot of our training into the energy sector about a decade ago. We were already doing this work, but specifically getting certifications in wind, solar, nuclear. I'm sure you all aware of how far advanced Canada is in the nuclear field. We have a specific program in Canada called the Red Seal program, and our workers are run through it. We can easily transfer that down here. So it comes back to the predictability of the jobs. We see the funding coming in this industry. We saw it, a couple of years ago, and the states moving towards this. And so that's why, we see some of our shifting in our certification process and our apprenticeship standards. We have the capacity and the availability to move a workforce into the nuclear industry, yes.
Any other questions?
Skill like bias to the government on its own is hard. It's hard. So how do you guys build some pretty robust programs?
I can kick that off. So just using our pilot year with Utah as an example, Utah funded Breakline's workforce development program in the state. And then essentially said, hey, you're the expert. We are here to support you, but go do your thing. Breakline embeds with industry. And we do that so that we can really deeply understand what the talent needs are, what are the skill sets, what are the interests, what's the background, what's the experience that you need. And then we work in the flow of business to identify, train, and connect the appropriate talent for those roles. It's the type of connective tissue that is missing right now between our higher education sector and training programs in general, and actually that last mile of education that gets people hired. So the United States, I think, is the best in the world at fundamental upskilling and reskilling. Where we miss is the last mile of education, like actually getting that trained, developed person into the role. And that is where this public-private partnership has been really, really productive and fruitful in Utah. And that's the type of collaboration, Drew, that I would love to see more of.
I think I would add, Drew, that I think one of the things, as I get to travel, is what is unique about Utah is that we're extremely and highly collaborative as a state. And so it makes it very easy for us to be able to pull partners together. I mean, that's one of the primary things that we do as an office is really convene and to figure out, with our legislators and other offices of how we can collaborate. We realize, as a system, we don't have all the expertise. That was one of the things, we can only go so far. And so we have to partner. We have to partner with public education and figure out what are those barriers that we can break down. And so I think it's something that's very unique. I won't say completely unique, but I think that we have to our advantage in Utah, that it's just something that's how we do work, is bringing those partners together and figuring out and having those crucial conversations and those hard conversations and being able to bring those partners in of what are the obstacles, what are the barriers, and what do we have to do. And I think that's been one of the interesting things with this of, how do we work this out with unions, and how do we bring them to the table? How do we bring in our public education system for CTE coursework and make sure it's meeting what the needs are for industry? They're not easy questions. There are systems and bureaucracy that we have to go through, but we have to come to the table and have those hard conversations and kind of say, this isn't working for industry. And so I think it's something that we're good at as a state, and that we'll keep doing, and we just want to make sure that industry continues to engage for us to have those hard conversations. I think our time is up, so I want to thank you guys, but definitely feel free if there's any other questions that you want to ask to grab us afterwards. So thank you guys so much.
Got our panelists for our last session up here, and we'll get going. Okay, we're gonna get started with our last session here in the home stretch. All right. So over the past 2 days, we've heard a lot about what it takes to get nuclear projects off the ground. But one element we've skirted around a little bit, and several other speakers have touched on, is about working with communities and building trust in nuclear projects. This last session will examine how to overcome some of those challenges and have some of those conversations. I'll turn it over for introductions. Maybe we'll start with Stephanie.
Well, thank you so much for having me. We had a Washington State contingency here for an INL tour. Just worked out really well for me to be here, so thanks so much. I feel it's a privilege to be a member of the Washington State House of Representatives, and it was a goal of mine coming from the Tri-Cities, Washington, that's Pasco, Kennewick, and Richland, the home of the Manhattan Project, the home of the Columbia Generating Station, the home of the 4 lower Snake River dams. We are very energy-centric, and part of what we've been trying to do in the Tri-Cities for years is bring a small modular reactor to the Hanford Nuclear Reservation. We're in the process of, excuse me, cleanup at Hanford, as you all know, and we're sick and tired of being known as the armpit of Washington or the armpit of the United States. We don't want to be known just for that waste, that legacy waste from the Manhattan Project. We want to be known as a clean energy hub for the Pacific Northwest. And so that was our goal. My background is not in nuclear, it's in economic development. And so when I first got elected to the House of Representatives, my #1 goal for going was to bring an SMR to the Tri-Cities. And that started on the day that I was elected in 2022. And I founded the Washington State Legislative Nuclear Energy Caucus. First of its kind of an ad hoc committee. It's not a statutory committee, but just built a program. Basically, it's just a lunch and learn. Every other week during session, we have someone come in and give us a 40-minute presentation and have 10 minutes of Q&A, and we eat pizza and drink soda. And that happens every 2 weeks in our legislative session. And then during interim, we do 2 tours. We usually do a Puget Sound tour, which includes companies like UltraSafe, TerraPower, Helion, Zap, Avalanche. So we do include fission and fusion in the mix. And then we have a Richland tour usually that includes Framatome. This year it included General Matter. We have the Columbia Generating Station, obviously. And a lot of the times we take them out to the site, the Hanford site, and show them the vitrification plant if they want. And also the B reactor, which is historical. So it's something that we've done. We've never gone out of state, but this year we came to INL and blew our minds completely. It was so incredibly impressive. And we also have PNNL, a laboratory, national laboratory. So we boast that as well in the Tri-Cities. Really looking forward to getting a project up and running in the Tri-Cities.
Excellent. We made it. The last session of a inspiring day and a half of discussions. Just shout out and thank you to the WGA and particularly Governor Cox for your leadership and an important discussion. Really an inspiring discussion. I was pretty fired up here in that last panel, and you could see the passion, the enthusiasm, momentum that sort of builds in the room. Introductions. My name is Steve Kaiser. I'm a Senior Vice President and Global Energy Sector Lead for WSP. If you're not familiar with WSP, we are one of, if not the largest professional services companies in the world. About 74,000 professionals globally, almost 20,000 professionals in the US. The power and energy sector is one of our 4 core business lines. To show that commitment to the power and energy space, we're proud to have recently acquired Power Engineers, 4,000 professionals in that power space. It happens to be Idaho-based with a very strong presence in the West, so we're super excited to bring their talent into the WSP family. The WSP has a long history in the nuclear space. We've been active in this industry, quite honestly, helping to build a lot of the first reactors, 50 and 60 years ago. That history has continued. I won't mention the different R words that we talked about yesterday, but me personally, I've gotten involved. I'm an engineer by training, but here I am talking on a panel about public trust. Go figure. But I first got started in the nuclear space in the early 2000s with some of the large scale reactors and the licensing and permitting. WSP is proud. We supported 19 of those applications that went to the NRC for the large scale reactor. So highly experienced in that front end engineering, environmental advisory space for all things power and energy, but in particular nuclear. Here recently, we have supported or are supporting 12 SMR projects across the U.S. We're hopeful this week we'll hear about our 13th and maybe even 14th projects. So there is a lot of activity going on in the U.S. We're supporting another 12, maybe 15 globally. So I do work quite a bit with our global colleagues, and it's just interesting seeing the comparison and the approach and where things stand in the industry. So just excited to be a part of the panel discussion today and see how we can enhance that public trust.
We would have to test that out. I'm Hope Morrow. I've kind of been wearing two hats here today. My day job, I'm the head of all workforce and economic development activities here at Idaho National Laboratory. So thank you all for joining us on a sunny Idaho Falls. I think we had 2 days of sun, so you guys got the best of it. Don't come back till May. And then in my other capacity, I'm a co-founder and the co-chair of the Idaho Advanced Energy Consortium, which is a 501c6 here in the state of Idaho. That at its core, the charge of the consortium is to really kind of drive those deployments, right? Any of those advanced energy technologies, those companies that are seeking to locate in the Idaho area, connect to the national laboratory, the supply chain markets, the workforce, et cetera. I think we all enter into the energy industry in different ways. I happen to be an economist, so I came from an economics background. I was a labor economist for the state of Idaho and the state of Utah for a number of months before the laboratory called and said, hey, as we heard on the last panel, we need to start thinking about workforce in a slightly different way, more proactively. Can we forecast that? Can we start thinking about what the future of the energy workforce, not just for Idaho National Laboratory, but for the entire industry looks like? And I said, we sure can. So I left Utah after 6 wonderful months, moved back up to Idaho Falls, and I've been in Idaho ever since. So now in my role with both the laboratory and the consortium, it's this, connectivity between recognizing what the state and the communities want, both for their economy and for their people, what good growth looks like for them, being able to forecast and remove barriers to those workforce pipelines, and then also being thoughtful about how to onboard the energy industry into the Rocky Mountain West. What does that mean from a supply chain perspective? And if you aren't bringing the public along, i.e. having them kind of at the center of all these discussions, then you're not building that public trust, right? And so making sure that you are walking through those stages with your small rural communities to your larger metropolitan areas, and figuring out what that good growth looks like, and having that data-driven background to be articulate in what can and can't work potentially, or what would have to happen to make certain projects function properly, really is at the core of what we do. So I've found my passion work. I love being in the energy industry. It's a really nice kind of cross between economics and getting to be part of, I think, probably the most interesting industry in the States now. So.
Okay. Yeah, I know it may be no secret that nuclear energy could use some demystifying. So I guess to start, what do you see as some of the primary reasons for the distrust or lack of support that we're seeing for nuclear projects, especially in Western communities? How much of this do you think stems from experience or historical accidents versus lack of education or misinformation?
Yeah, happy to take that one on. So I'm in a heavy blue state, and while I don't want to get partisan here, the Democrats have control of the House, the Senate, the governor's office, and some would say the state Supreme Court. But we And so there is a lot of, I call it the China syndrome effect. Thanks to that propaganda film, set us back a long way. Plus, we have, the Manhattan Project and the waste that came from that. That has scared our community and this entire state. I remember when I grew up in Seattle, and when my husband at the time said, "Hey, I want to move to the Tri-Cities. What do you think?" Like, no way. I will go for 2 years, but I don't want to put our roots down there. I don't want to have a family there. I don't want to be a downwinder. There's a lot of terrible stuff out there. There's this nuclear, big, huge energy system out there, and I don't want to have this affect my children. And so I'm the one that ended up taking a deep dive into it. But really, for the most part, it's the divide between the west side and the east side. So you have those of us that are close to the reactor and the Hanford cleanup site, which gets conflated constantly. The different types of waste, from legacy waste to the nuclear energy waste. And that is extremely difficult to overcome. The safety issue, that's a huge issue. I mean, I wasn't opposed to nuclear, but I certainly didn't want to raise a family in the Tri-Cities because of that. So there is this kind of inherent ingrown, and I think, all of us know we blame the Simpsons, we blame, the China syndrome, we blame the accidents. You can talk about Chernobyl and Fukushima all you want, 3 Mile Island. I can remember my very first day in the legislature. Actually, it was before my very first day when we were getting some training done, and we had to sit by someone on the other side of the aisle. And I can remember him saying, we had to ask each other, one of our things that we had to do in this training was talk to the other person on the other side of the aisle about what your goal was, why you were in the legislature. And I said, well, I want to bring an SMR. I'd like to see nuclear power and advanced nuclear in Washington State. And he said, I have 3 words for you: 3 Mile Island. And that was his response. Like, I'm not going to talk about it anymore. It's over. It's a non-starter. So I knew there was a ton of work to do. And that's just, that's what started that process of really trying to develop some trust. First, we have to squelch the idea of the safety issue. And we have to also draw a very clear line of demarcation between legacy waste and spent fuel. What is that? How do you explain that? What are the benefits that could come from advanced fuel, from advanced nuclear, or from the Columbia Generating Station? What does that bring to our community, not detract? So we have to make that separation very clear and it starts with the community that you live in. And for me, the Tri-Cities, it's pretty easy. I don't think we have any NIMBYs there because they live so close to the Columbia Generating Station in Hanford. They get it. And all their friends work in the industry in one way or another. So they really understand nuclear, but it's outside of Eastern Washington and that south central part of Washington. It's Western Washington, the heart of Seattle, that really, really is terrified of this. So it takes a lot of work.
And I guess outside of folks who maybe have experience or have knowledge about nuclear, what does that conversation look like in communities where maybe they don't have that same historical knowledge or background?
Yeah, and I'll add to that. And by the way, I love that you brought up The Simpsons, one of my favorite shows, but that is also very irritating when you see the things glowing green and the dogs with 3 heads and what have you, but it doesn't help. And yeah, we can point to Chernobyl and 3 Mile Island and some of the sensationalized things, but I would argue that it starts closer to home also. And to your point, there's communities that don't have nuclear, and you look at where they get their sources of information. And I'm going to share a story. I told my daughter I probably wouldn't tell a story, but I'm going to anyway. She's my youngest daughter. She's a high school senior this year. Last year as a junior, she took a class called AP Environmental Science. And one of the sessions they cover was on energy and energy creation and production and just kind of a pros and cons. And she took it, that session was about a year ago. So in preparation for this panel, I asked her, what do you remember about that class, just in general, and in particular with nuclear? And the thing she brought up was nuclear accidents, 3 Mile Island, the big parabolic cooling towers with, I believe she said the poisonous smoke that's coming out of that, which is completely inaccurate, but and then the high cost. And I said, well, what about solar and wind? And it was clean energy, and they're cheap and quick, and all the positives. And nuclear was negative, 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 negative. And maybe that's a function of our education system, but I look at that as going back to the previous panel, talking about this younger generation and their passion and enthusiasm that changed the world mentality. And it starts right there. And as a high school junior, I think they were talking about a 5th grader that was involved in some projects that are now starting to enter the workforce and join their companies. But how do we transform that education system at an early age? How do we take some of those sensationalized events? I think the governor made a point yesterday about 3 Mile Island, and it worked. Yes, it was a high-profile incident, but the safety systems worked. Plant Vogel, obviously well publicized about the challenges and cost overruns and years behind schedule. And my goodness, people went to jail over that project. But have we told the story like yesterday on the panel that Unit 4 was 40% cheaper than Unit 3? So there's a lot of positives that we can continue to promote. And I think it starts at a very early age. It starts close to home. And in particular, some of those communities that don't have nuclear as a part of their history and their background, looking at those sources of information where they hear about things.
I would add that we have a lot of demystifying to do. We have a lot of educating to do. The avenue in which we do that, right? We have to hit all of them. I think that's information we all have. I think an approach that has worked in Idaho in particular is whatever that community needs at that time. If the energy industry has a solution in it for that community, it's very easy to educate if you're also building that solution into the conversation. So if you have a community that's a rural community that's going, we need a more sustainable economy. How do we diversify our industry mix? How do we grab a handful more jobs that are, good family wage jobs, et cetera? It's very simple for us to talk about how the energy industry is a potential solution to some of those problems that they're faced with every day, right? That is their charge as a, county commissioner or a mayor or what have you, is to make sure that society and their community is better, that there are great jobs for the people that want to live and work there. And so we use that avenue often to educate, to say, this is an opportunity in this component of the supply chain in the nuclear industry. And then it opens up the door for all of those questions. Well, what about the safety? What about this? What about the timeline? What about the cost? And then they're the one asking, which I think makes a big difference. I think all 3 of us probably spend a lot of time talking. And oftentimes people listen, oftentimes they don't because they have other things to do in their day. But when people are asking us the questions, when they're saying, okay, I can see how that's a potential solution, but here are all of my concerns, sometimes the listening gets better when the conversation goes in that direction. So I would say, we have a ton of things to do, alter education, have all these conversations. If there's a way to bring the energy industry education in as a solution to some things that they're bringing to the table, it can bridge that gap really nicely.
One thing, just real quick, I want to bring up is that argument, you would think that would work. The economic benefits doesn't really work in Washington. It just doesn't. That's not the argument. The argument is decarbonization, deep decarbonization. The argument is this is how we will get from here to our CETA goals, our Clean Energy Transformation Act goals, and our from 2021, our State Clean Energy Strategy and our Climate Commitment Act. This is how Washington State is going to meet our climate goals, not just goals, climate mandates, requirements. So this is how you get there. If there is no roadmap already, then and there isn't truly, this is how you can get from point A to point B. So that's the selling point. I know in one of the things we do that has been done in the Nuclear Energy Caucus is I focus mainly on Democrats because I feel like the Republicans, it's being used as a political football. this advanced nuclear is more of a Republican energy, just is so dumb that we have that. And then renewables are more of the Democrat, the liberal environmental type energy. And just that, I refuse to conform to that. So what we do is we'll say, okay, who can we get to come out here? And so we asked former Secretary of Energy Ernest Moniz, Dr. Moniz, to come out and say and teach, and we had a reception for him that night. That was the best attended Nuclear Energy Caucus lunch and learn we'd ever had. But it was a Democrat talking to Democrats. And so when I do send out those invites, I try to find a picture of, Ernest Moniz, Dr. Moniz with President Clinton, and I'll put that in the background, and here I am, a Republican, like taking around the Clinton photo and saying, look, this is Dr. Ernest Moniz, and Secretary, the Energy Czar, Carol Browner for Barack Obama. I took a picture around of her with Joe Biden and President Obama. And that was the invitation. And I just took them to each of the Democrat legislators, and we got those in their mailboxes. And that was the second best well-attended Nuclear Energy Caucus we ever had. It's come one, come all. You don't have to be a member of the Nuclear Energy Caucus. You just self-identify as a member of this caucus if you want to learn. So you have to have something for them that's going to interest them. You can't have the Republicans pontificating and the well-known Republicans that support nuclear talking about it. And it really does come from your leadership. I have found that more Democrats have supported nuclear in the face of, they've been very brave. They've been very courageous in voting for nuclear, even though they know their contingency, their constituents are not going to be pleased with that vote because they just don't know about it enough yet. But they are being brave, and they are going down that road because they understand it. So it's top down too, not just from the youth. But we have to take that leadership role and help them, give them reasons. You have to give them reasons that they can vote yes, instead of always just playing the safe thing by saying no.
And you mentioned the Nuclear Energy Caucus. I think a lot of other folks this week have talked about different forms of partnerships and coalition building. But really, from sort of a messaging standpoint, how can we get project developers, policymakers, other stakeholders to sort of coalesce around the same message around nuclear energy?
I would say that, first and foremost, raising your hand, right, is important to say whatever group you represent, whether that's an industry mix, a state, a group of elected officials, et cetera, saying that we're passionate about this thing. We want it here, or here are the benefits of doing that. Raising your hand, I think, is one of those first steps. Then you can set that stage for what are the benefits, or why are we bringing this to the table. And I think that looks different everywhere you are. I think, to the representative's point, what Washington State needs and their concerns are very different from what Idaho State needs, or Utah, or et cetera. And so meeting those people where they're at, our people where they're at, with their concerns, is exactly how you build that public trust. I also think that the messaging part is that exact same sentiment, right? If you are messaging to the entire country, then you have this mixed match of concerns and needs and desires. So if you can isolate your audience to the best of your ability, or have a series of strategies to isolate those audiences, to target them, to bring that attention to those topics, to say, this is why we care about nuclear energy, or this is how nuclear energy is going to get you to XYZ goal, then hopefully, right, you're assimilating to them as quickly as possible. But I certainly think that raising your hand piece is really important. Governor Cox's the shorts thing, I'm never going to be able to forget it. But it's that idea where it's kind of been in the background for a really long time, right? Nuclear energy and the industry has been living behind us or around us quietly for 50 plus years. And now we're all going to have to be brave or be more vocal where we haven't in the past, and finding the right avenues to do that without oversaturating the market is a very fine balance, and one that we all have to strike in our respective ways.
Great point. I love that it's, meeting people where they're at and understanding what's important to them, because it is going to vary, location to location. And I mentioned in my introductory comments at WSP, we've had the good fortune of being involved in 12 SMR development projects in the last 5 or 6 years. So we've really had a front row seat on the public engagement, or in some cases the lack thereof, and how that has worked. And I think that's a great point as far as understanding what's important to the community and how to engage with them and really provide the facts. I mean, I love the saying, facts are your friends. And if you don't present those facts, they're going to fill that void with something. And it's usually something on the negative. But one project in particular is being developed in a community that was not very supportive of nuclear power. And this particular client worked very, very hard to engage the community. They had about 6 or 7 public meetings. They invited local and state politicians to these meetings. They had an open session for members of the media just to hear the story of what the development was going to look like, impacts, job creation, economic benefits, impacts to their power bill, and how much they pay for their power. The very first one of those meetings had 100 people in person, plus I'm not sure how many more online. By the time we got to that 5th and the 6th one, actually the last one we participated in about a month ago, had 0 people in attendance in person, which some might say, well, that's bad. But through the series of the education, they had answered all their questions, and they had a dozen people online, but no questions came in online. To me, that was a win. That was a success. But they really worked hard to engage that community, to hear their concerns, incorporate those concerns into the project development process. So there's material changes they have made to the overall project based on some of the feedback. And to me, that was a success. That was a win. It took a lot of work, and it took a lot of listening and understanding what was important to them. And conversely, we've seen clients that have very little public engagement, and the projects are struggling to get that local support, and it leads to things like the previous panel talking about the job creation, the workforce, and where you're going to get your people. And hopefully a lot of that comes from the local communities, but if you don't have their support, that's you're off to a tough start.
Well, in addition to sort of that front end support building, when you're looking to develop a project, how do you ensure that communication and buy-in from the community is retained through the life of the project? What does that continual engagement look like?
Sorry.
I was just going to say, if you can create that foundation before the project shows up, that's really great, right? If you can be talking about the energy industry or the nuclear energy industry with those communities way before there's a potential SMR in their backyard, you're in a way better situation. The consortium hosts breakfasts quarterly. We call them the Up and Atom, ATOM breakfasts. They're in our community every single quarter, right? And our public folks from all other sectors, the folks that are retired that have been in the industry, some of our school teachers, et cetera, they show up every quarter. Today, I've been in town for 24 hours and I've had 5 people go, breakfast on the 22nd next month, right? So they look forward to that morning when we all get to go together, 100+ people or so, and they get to see each other. They get to hear about what's going on in the industry, what the consortium's doing, some updates around the laboratory or new projects, et cetera. But that excitement is being built up in the general public before we then enter going, hey, we want this specific project that's going to do, this to our roads and, dunk up the highways, and we need this many jobs, et cetera, right? So building up that public trust generally about the industry, generally about what opportunities there are, managing some of those concerns early, then bringing the project in is probably going to be your most successful pathway if you can manage it.
One thing I thought of while you were talking was I was going to have a meeting with 6 members of the Confederated Tribes of Umatilla. Our tribes are really, really important to us in Washington, and I know in Utah and Idaho as well. But I was trying to think, what can I do? What can I do to maybe just make a little tiny bit of a dent, a little bit of an impact? And I knew that they had been opposed, or the Yakama Nation had been opposed, and several of the Yakama Nation were going to be there too. I knew that they were opposed to the Horse Heaven Hills wind project because it's huge, and it was over 171.5 square miles on the top of our beautiful vistas in the Tri-Cities. all the way down through Prosser, which it's just huge. So I didn't know what to do. And I thought, okay, well, I think what I'll do is I'll just take this sticky note, these sticky notes, this is one of the little 3M yellow things. And I had a bare wall in my office and I stuck 162 yellow sticky notes on the wall and a half. I cut one in half and I did a half to represent each square mile of this project that would be the largest wind project in the state. And I'm not dissing wind right now. I was just trying to make a point. And then I took one green sticky note, it was 1 square mile, and I put it up top and it said nuclear on it. And then they came in and I didn't say a word. And then of course they asked, why do you have all these sticky notes on your wall? It's like, well, it's a funny thing. I just wanted to talk about energy density versus energy sprawl and why it's so important that we consider that when we're talking about siting, permitting, and the best bang for our buck for this specific area. And it was that connection. And another thing is you also have to be, you also can't try to be the smartest person in the room. I'm certainly not. I'm not a nuclear engineer, but I know there's a lot of you here that are and know everything there is to know about nuclear. But I think it plays better when you are more humble and willing to learn and open to receiving. It was Harry Truman that said, and Ronald Reagan said this too, but and I will slaughter this. It's amazing how much you can accomplish when you don't have to have the credit for doing it. If it's somebody else's idea and if they come up with it on their own, you don't even have to put that question to them because you've given them what you want them to think about and they come to that conclusion themselves. It might take a little time, but you're not, those are the meaningful changes that it takes when you can just suck it up and don't pontificate and be willing to learn. And I think that's a huge key. And then working with others to not have to take the credit for any of the progress that's been made. I think it makes a big difference.
You've each had a lot of these conversations with different stakeholders and constituents, but I guess, are there any lessons learned? I mean, you each work in such different areas and states, and from your own experiences in working with these communities, what are some of the key lessons learned on what communities appreciate, what we could be doing better, where there's need for policy or support?
I'll start by maybe offering up a word as much as we can is consistency. Not only in the messaging and how to engage the community, I think that's an important part of it, but even looking at things like the variation from state to state, and we still have states that have a ban or a moratorium or in effect a moratorium on nuclear power. And some states, give Texas credit. They want to do everything, bigger and better in Texas. They want to be #1 in nuclear. So you've got this complete, brought into the spectrum, but I think it sends that mixed message to broader public and community that there's something inherently, quote unquote, wrong with nuclear power when you have states that are banning it, or even, countries looking worldwide versus some that are proponents of it. And I do think we need to take advantage of some of the bipartisan support. And as you said, sort of that courage and bravery from Democrats and Republicans that are in favor of it to provide a consistent, framework, a consistent regulatory process, again, as much as we can. Stuff will still vary state to state, but I think if we can get behind some of that momentum and provide that consistency, that sends a very strong message to the public, and it allows us to sort of rally around that. And then you have the grassroots efforts on maybe a project by project basis on how to engage the community. That consistency is going to be important.
I would add to that, and we call that being a good partner, right? If you show up regularly, you know who you're talking to, you can be relied on just as much as you're asking to be able to rely on these communities. It's really important. Idaho National Laboratory and the Idaho Advanced Energy Consortium know that at the basis of everything we do, we have to be good partners or the technology stops. right? The system works because everyone is involved. I'll use an example. We were designated as the nation's nuclear tech hub in 2023 when the U.S. Department of Commerce had the Tech Hubs opportunity. The consortium administered the Intermountain West Nuclear Energy Corridor, which is currently an Idaho-Wyoming partnership nuclear tech hub. And as part of that, while we did not get one of those big checks that some of the designated tech hubs got in the first round of funding, we did get a couple of small ones. And we decided on $106 million worth of projects to kickstart some of these SMR demonstrations in the Rocky Mountain West. But one of those projects, under all the details and the bylines of the budget, was a feasibility study, specifically for the Shoshone-Bannock tribes. And they're a great partner of ours, right? They're right next door. We do a lot of work with them. And a lot of tribes, a lot of smaller communities across this nation have experienced this thing where they get asked to be a part of something when it's convenient for the bigger body or when they need to check a box or what have you. And we promised, like, we are a good partner. That's not why you're here. That's not why you're at this table. We want your community to be successful, just like we want everything else in this application to be successful. And so when we got those smaller components budget back, we prioritized still funding that feasibility study. That gets published this month. We're very, very excited to share it. So the idea of being consistent, being a good partner as best you possibly can. Obviously, if you don't get your award funded, you can't keep all of those promises or do all the projects. But then being able to take it to that next step, right? Having that conversation with that community is one thing, but then being able to produce a product that helps them understand how feasible some of these energy projects are to them is that next step of giving them that data, being able to educate on where you're headed and give them information to make decisions about themselves, right? It's not for me to dictate what should happen on the Fort Hall Reservation. It's for the leaders and the constituents of those communities to decide. And if we can help them get that information to the best of our ability, then we're not only being good partners, we're being consistent partners. We're showing up the way that they need us to, and then they can make decisions that's best for them. And hopefully that also aligns with the goals of the nuclear industry.
I thought that was so great. I don't have much to add except to say consistency, but also persistency. I think that if you're persistent, just keep going, keep going. I remember we flew, Cam Gaffarian and Clay Sell with X Energy actually flew in to the Washington State Capitol to do a presentation for X Energy. There was 6 people in attendance. I was mortified, first of all. Just how could we have these people fly all the way out and nobody shows up? There was some emergency appropriations meeting or something, but that's sometimes what happens when you're in session. Your schedules change. But from that meeting, the people that were actually there at the meeting were the ones that got more personal. So they got more one-on-one attention. They got to ask more questions. Just that persistency, even though we knew the schedule was changing, we knew there might not be that many people there. It was that one meeting changed everything for the 6 people that were there and for how they chose to move forward with their ideas about nuclear. So I think persistence, just keep going, and then also those relationships, foster good relationships with those that don't see eye to eye with you, or even those that do. The collaboration, the consortiums. I had a nuclear energy caucus movie night one time, and we were showing Nuclear Now by Oliver Stone. You guys seen that? Just because Democrats like Oliver Stone, right? So I'm like, okay, come watch Nuclear Now. And so we had candy and soda, and we watched this movie, and I had 5 or 6 Democrats at my house on my couch, and Lieutenant Governor Heck had fallen asleep. He's snoring on my couch watching Nuclear Now, but he supports nuclear. I don't know if it's because of the Nuclear Energy Caucus, but now we can, those relationships really do mean everything, and they make a huge difference in just we are in a moment, aren't we? We are in a moment in history right now where we're going to be able to look back and go, that was the moment. This was the time. This is happening right now. Are we going to embrace this and run with it and and make the most of it? Or are we going to back away, be afraid, be too timid? Right now is the moment that we're in, and I'm so excited about it. And that excitement has to be contagious, and people can feel that and recognize it and go, oh, I'm interested in that. So I think it's really important, persistence, and then fostering those good relationships.
Okay, we're gonna turn it over to audience questions. Have time for one or two. Get you a mic.
Morning. So we've had this big discussion about a committed order book, and we've got 11 states in this consortium and lots of other states in other consortiums. North Dakota is doing a siting study. What's going to happen when there's not enough INL to go around, right? GAIN has been super helpful in North Dakota. You call them, they show up, they've got experts, they answer your questions. My community is getting a big wind farm, 500 megawatts. It's a 20-year community-led project. We're in the final decision point on that. It's brutal for the community. It's super time-consuming. We have all these community meetings. We've got op-eds in the paper every week. Like, when GAIN's overwhelmed, how are we going to not let a bunch of communities fall through the cracks and have a really bad relationship with nuclear power where they get really opposed because a few members of the community are on the internet and they found the resources that answer their questions?
I would say that that's the designation between national support, federal support, and kind of this localized stuff that we're talking about. I was just in Atlanta last week, and there was this whole discussion. It was all like the state consortia folks. So it was like Virginia, and me, and Tennessee, and all of us sitting around the table, the us's, right, going, what are you doing differently? What are we doing? Trying to figure out who's posturing, who's ahead. We're having a good time. And there was this discussion about, well, what are we doing on a national level? How do we make this a national thing? And there was a couple very strict points about there is a role on the federal level, right? Which includes making sure that the INLs, the GAINs, those federal resources are well resourced, right? Because there isn't a reason why we couldn't reach all the communities that are seeking it with GAIN, as long as GAIN is properly resourced. But I don't think that that's where all of the effort should be, right? We really have to be thoughtful about what is the role at that level versus the role at the state level versus the role of these sometimes multi-state consortia versus the local level. And those are 4+ very different initiatives. And as difficult as that is to try to manage all at the same time, I think if we try to emphasize one primarily over any of the rest of them, something will fall through the cracks because we're trying to drive this industry so fast, so quickly.
I would add maybe one comment to that. I think they're great points, and just kind of stepping back, looking at it more broadly as far as the call it community engagement fatigue. The site selection process is a big part of successful deployment of nuclear and gaining that public trust, and that needs to be part of the equation. And understanding where, and probably more importantly, why nuclear makes sense for a given community, or maybe it doesn't. And you move on to the next place. We do a lot of work in the siting of all kinds of power systems, and it's amazing the criteria that is used or prioritized for certain developers, certain public entities, as far as what makes a good site for transmission and substation, or wind farms, nuclear power. And so to me, that needs to be part of the equation, and understanding how that impacts a community, and just to some extent, how accepting a community might be for whatever power system that might be going there. So that site selection process is a really critical part of the overall successful deployment.
I just have an FYI to that. Maybe you don't know, but you guys are a member of a consortium with Washington State. So it's just beginning, but we have 7, soon to be 8 states that are members of the consortium that the Nuclear Energy Caucus put together, and that was under the direction or suggestion of EFI to come together as states. So it would be Washington, Oregon, Idaho, Utah, Wyoming, Montana, did I say Alaska? Oh, and Hawaii. So that Alaska and Hawaii would be 7 and 8. So we have a call tomorrow. We've had several different phone calls. This all started from Lehigh, and Jeff Morris, I saw him here earlier, so shout out to Jeff. But everyone there on that in that consortium, it's a casual type consortium. We're just feeling it out, putting some feelers out to see who might be interested, what states want to come on board. And I know like Utah and Idaho are already involved in somewhat of a consortium. We have a different objective. Ours is to lower the price by getting order books filled and choosing some technologies that we may want to go with. So we're just having those initial conversations to hopefully lower the price, and working with all of those states to get to the point where we can get all the governors together and have them meet with Secretary Moniz to discuss the potential ways we can move forward with that together. So that's already in the works and happening, and we have representatives, at least 2 from each state, and so yeah, it's going on.
Very, very simple question. What is the best resource, the best media company, the best public company, the best private company that has made the case either through their publications or video or internet, whatever, making the case that nuclear is safe? Where do you find the best research? You say, hey, is nuclear safe? You say, yeah, go to that site, go to that company, go to that. Like, who's doing the best job at answering the most simple question? Is it safe?
Yeah, the Clean Air Task Force. For Washington State, it's the Clean Air Task Force because you have the scientists, they're nonpartisan from MIT, talking about they're extremely knowledgeable. They've done a ton of casework. They've done a lot of research. They have published peer-reviewed articles written. But for Washington State and giving that environmental case, it's been the Clean Air Task Force out of Washington, D.C.
Yeah, I think that's a good. I mean, there's tons of sources. Trying to look at it from an independent perspective. The Department of Energy does a great job of putting out information. And again, I go back to that phrase of facts are your friends and letting people come to their own conclusions. But generally, when you put the facts out there about nuclear power, I think folks will come away with a favorable opinion. And DOE does a pretty good job of that. Of course, there's lots of organizations devoted to the nuclear industry that, yes, you could argue they are there to support the nuclear industry, but they do a good job of putting out those facts and answering some difficult questions. So, I think there's a variety of different sources. And then as we go through this, SMR, advanced reactor deployment, and the community engagement, I think there's a lot of utilities that do a great job of that and understanding the importance to the community and really boiling it down to this big, complex, infrastructure development project to how does this impact, a community of 500 people that live around a lake where this project is going to be developed. So to me, they do a pretty good job of that, storytelling, if you will, but showing that local impact. So there's a variety of sources there.
I would say the representative mentioned this Nuclear Now, the video. If you haven't watched it, what I think is the best about it is if you can get someone to pay attention and not snore on the couch for an hour and a half, like that's literally all it would take if you haven't seen it. It talks about the economics, it talks about communities. You have experts from Idaho National Lab, from the Department of Energy. I'm not going to pick between NEI and ANS. There are some brilliant people in all of those organizations that do really great work in that space to debunk some of these things. But I think that movie in particular accesses what I would consider to be the widest swath of the American public in a way that is intriguing, educational, debunk some of these myths, and quite frankly is just like pretty well done. So if you're looking for one piece to like hone in, watch Nuclear Now for an hour and a half. I actually forced my entire family on Christmas Day last year to watch it because my mom and dad couldn't tell people what I did for a living. And I said, I'm tired of this. So on Christmas Day, I locked them all in the living room and I said, we're all here. You're all watching Nuclear Now. And they were all whining. And at the end, they were like, oh, it's pretty cool. And I'm like, thank you. So,
but you have to watch the whole thing.
yeah, it's an hour and a half.
The first 45 minutes is about how terrible nuclear is, like all the awful things and accidents and everything. But it gets better.
One thing that I noticed was absent from this conversation was the public discussion about utility rates in nuclear.
Mm-hmm.
How much of that is real in a public engagement strategy? The pushback on rates.
Attending some of the public meetings that I have, it is a very real question, and I don't know that there's a strong answer when you look at take a data center that might be pulling upwards of a gigawatt that could, suck up a AP1000, reactor by itself with, a rate case type of utility approach that, could have an impact to, an individual or a residential utility bill. I mean, it's a very real question, and again, I've seen different levels of answering that question, or just pointing to public service commissions and certain discussions that are being had at a state level. But again, it's probably beyond the scope of this discussion, but it is a very, very, very real question that comes up, and you can see the concern because their power bills have gone up significantly in the last 4 or 5 years. Some cases will be projected to continue to rise.
I think it depends state to state as well. I mean, you have different policy for each state. Like in Washington, we have the Climate Commitment Act, and that makes a huge difference for those power rates. We have some programs where you can get help with those rates. You have our hyperscalers that are taking a lot of that responsibility because they're willing to invest $300 million, $500 million in projects that will take some of that risk away. And also, well, in Washington State, it's different because you have the UTC and there's different entities where they are going to decide those rates. They're not, you can't just make your own rates. So I don't know about Idaho and Utah and others, but I know in Washington it's not that clear cut. There's a lot of reasons that go into that, and to have those conversations though is extremely important because we don't want to build out infrastructure on the backs of those who can least afford it.
All right, I'm going to wrap us up here. So please join me in thanking our last panelists. Hope, Steve, Stephanie, thank you so much for being here. This is great way to end the day. I'm going to quickly wrap us up here. First of all, thank you so much to Governor Little for hosting us, as well as Governor Cox for joining us here and for his leadership on this initiative. Thank you to Director Wagner and Idaho National Lab for hosting us here this week. And a massive thank you to all of the speakers who shared their time and expertise with us on panels and engaging in the workshop. I also want to acknowledge our initiative partners whose strong and generous support make a lot of this work possible. Looking ahead, Governor Jared Polis will host the second initiative workshop in Denver, Colorado next month, October 28th and 29th. We'll have registration and agenda information available soon. So I'd encourage you to stay engaged with us. Findings and recommendations from these workshops and the initiative will be compiled into a report, which we will release in June of next year. Buses will pick up outside of the building in the parking lot area if you're heading back to the hotels. Lastly, just a big thank you to the WGA staff, both here and holding it down in Denver back home, and the Idaho National Lab staff for all of their work planning this workshop. Takes a lot to put these together, so really appreciate you all.